The Quran is more than a sacred book. It is a divine revelation that has shaped hearts, guided civilizations, and transformed the spiritual landscape of the world for over 14 centuries. Its pages hold not only the literal word of God, but also the rhythms of solace, wisdom, and purpose that echo into the deepest corners of the human soul. Unlike any ordinary text, the Quran carries a timeless essence, capable of speaking across generations, touching lives in the stillness of the night or the chaos of the day. Its message does not fade with time, nor does it become outdated in the face of evolving human concerns. Instead, it remains perpetually relevant, a spiritual compass that continues to point toward truth, justice, and peace. The story of the Quran begins not in the hands of scholars or rulers, but in a quiet cave nestled in the mountains of Mecca. It was in this solitary space that the very first word, read, was revealed to a man who had never read a word in his life. From that moment, what followed was not just the transmission of divine knowledge, but the awakening of a message that would reshape hearts and reshape societies. The Quran began as a voice in the darkness, a light in the stillness, offering answers to the deepest questions of existence. What is our purpose? Where do we go after death? What is right and wrong? Each verse offered a glimpse into the vast ocean of divine wisdom, providing a framework for the human journey from birth to the afterlife. As time passed, the Quran did more than offer answers. It transformed its listeners. Those who were lost in tribal rivalries, corruption, and ignorance found in it a moral revolution. Compassion grew where cruelty had once lived. Justice was demanded where power had once ruled unchecked. The transformation was not only societal, but deeply personal. Men and women who once wandered without direction began to live with purpose, their hearts illuminated by the words they had come to memorize, cherish, and live by. The Quran was not just a book of rules or historical lessons. It became a living guide, breathing life into the human soul, reminding it of its creator, and calling it toward a path of spiritual excellence. There is a reason the Quran has endured unchanged, preserved in both memory and text, since the moment it was first revealed. It is not merely protected by human hands, but safeguarded by divine promise. Its preservation is a miracle not only of accuracy, but of emotional continuity. A believer today who opens the Quran recites the same verses that moved the Prophet's companions to tears, compelled them to rise in the night in prayer, or gave them the courage to face incredible trials. The power of the Quran lies not in its complexity, but in its purity. Its messages are often simple, but they carry within them a profound depth that unfolds with every recitation, every reflection, and every moment of sincere engagement. Even in its quiet moments, the Quran teaches. The cadence of its verses offers peace to restless minds. Its repetition is not redundancy, but rhythm, a divine heartbeat that reminds the soul of its origin and its destination. The Quran does not need to shout to be heard. It whispers truths that cut through confusion. It offers reassurance to the anxious, forgiveness to the repentant, clarity to the lost. Its verses are imbued with the language of mercy, of hope, and of divine love. They touch not just the intellect, but the emotions, guiding the heart gently back to its natural state of worship and wonder. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen, philosophies have emerged and faded, yet the Quran remains, not as a relic of the past, but as a voice alive in the present. Its recitation continues across every continent, from the lips of children and scholars alike, creating a chorus that binds the global Muslim community together in a sacred bond. That unity is not just cultural, it is spiritual. A single verse recited in Indonesia is the same one whispered in Morocco, memorized in the heart of a child in Nigeria, and understood by a seeker in Canada. It is a thread of continuity that stretches across time and space, uniting hearts in reverence and remembrance. The Quran's impact is not limited to those who speak Arabic or have spent years in theological study. Its message transcends language. Many who hear it for the first time, without understanding a single word, find themselves overcome with emotion. The tone, the melody, the very sound of the Quran seems to awaken something ancient and instinctive within the soul. It is as if the soul recognizes its source, responding with awe, tears, or stillness. That resonance is one of the Quran's most profound qualities. The ability to communicate through the heart, bypassing the noise of the world and reaching into the essence of the listener. Its guidance extends far beyond religious rituals. The Quran offers principles that elevate human dignity, protect the vulnerable, and establish justice. It calls for mercy even in the face of hostility, urges patience in times of trial, and commands gratitude in moments of ease. These teachings are not idealistic abstractions, but deeply practical instructions that shape real lives. They inform how to speak, how to forgive, how to care for one's parents, and how to treat those in need. The Quran's teachings are not confined to the mosque or the prayer mat. They accompany the believer into every aspect of life, infusing it with meaning and divine connection. Over the centuries, the Quran has served as the foundation for scholarship, civilization, and inner reform. From the golden age of Islamic science and philosophy to the quiet recitation of a solitary traveler at dawn, its influence is woven into both the grand and intimate moments of history. It has inspired poets, architects, mystics, jurists, and ordinary people, each finding in its verses a mirror, a guide, or a refuge. The Quran has never required embellishment to prove its worth. It speaks with the authority of the Creator, yet with the gentleness of a loving guardian. There is something sacred in the act of turning its pages, something weighty yet comforting. It is not just a physical book. It is a bridge between the human and the divine. The one who opens it does not do so alone, for within its verses is the presence of guidance, the echo of revelation, and the closeness of the one who revealed it. It is this nearness, this spiritual intimacy, that has kept the Quran alive in the hearts of believers for generations. To read it is to remember who one is and where one is meant to return. This is the story of the Quran, a book that came down from the heavens not to be worshipped itself, but to lead worshipers to the one who sent it. It is a story of mercy, sent to a world in need of light, of revelation unveiled in times of darkness. It is a story of transformation, not only of nations but of individual souls. It is the story of a miracle that continues to unfold every time a voice rises to recite its timeless words. In the quiet folds of time, on a night unlike any other, a moment arrived that would forever change the course of human history. It did not come with the noise of battle or the pomp of empires. It descended instead in stillness upon a solitary man who sat in a cave, far from the world, searching for answers that had long stirred in his heart. The mountain air was cool, the cave dim, and the silence complete, except for the thoughts of the man within, thoughts that had grown heavier with each passing year. He was not a prophet then, not yet. He was a seeker, honest, sincere, and restless with the questions that pressed upon his soul. This man, Muhammad, known among his people for his truthfulness and upright character, had long found solace in retreating to the cave of Hira, nestled in the rugged hills surrounding Mecca. The world outside was noisy with idolatry, corruption, and cruelty. He was disturbed by the injustices he saw, the neglect of the poor, the oppression of women, the lies told in the name of wealth and power. He could not turn away from these things. His heart, even before prophethood, was attuned to truth and to justice. It was not enough for him to live a life of quiet decency. He needed to understand. He needed to know the meaning of existence, the nature of the Creator, and the purpose of life itself. Each time he ascended the mountain, leaving behind the buzz of Meccan life, he carried within him these questions. And each night he spent in contemplation, beneath the canopy of stars and the gentle hum of wind through stone. He poured his heart into seeking something higher. On one particular night, during the blessed month of Ramadan, he would find it. Or rather, it would find him. That night, the world stood still, not visibly, not outwardly, but in a way that made everything feel suspended. The cave was as it always had been, dark, secluded, and serene. Yet something unseen stirred in the air, something vast and sacred. Then, suddenly, he was not alone. In a moment too swift to anticipate, too immense to comprehend, the veil between the heavens and earth was lifted, and the mighty angel Jibril, known in the Bible as Gabriel, appeared before him. There is no earthly way to capture the scale of such a moment. Jibril, the archangel of revelation, stood in his glory, and the cave was filled with an awe-inspiring majesty. The light, the presence, the weight of the unseen, it all bore down with a power that stunned the senses and seized the soul. This was not a dream. It was real in every way, yet beyond anything the prophet had ever known. In that sacred encounter, Jibril spoke. One word, a command: read. The word fell not like a whisper, but like the strike of thunder, wrapped in mercy. The prophet, peace be upon him, a man who had never learned to read or write, was overwhelmed. "I am not a reader," he responded, humbly and honestly. Then came the embrace. Jibril held him tightly, so tightly that it pressed upon his very being, as if imprinting the command into his soul. Again the word came, read. Again the prophet responded, and again the angel embraced him with such intensity that no doubt remained in the air. This happened 3 times, each exchange deepening the gravity of the moment, and then the first words of revelation flowed. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. These were the first verses of what would become the Holy Quran. They were not just words. They were a divine declaration. The night had not merely brought comfort to a seeker. It had brought guidance to all of humanity. The command to read, given to a man who could not read, was itself a miracle. It was a summons to knowledge, to reflection, to purpose. It was the moment when the heavens reached down to awaken the hearts of those on earth. In the immediate aftermath, the prophet was shaken to his core. The cave, once a sanctuary, had become a place of divine encounter. The light, the voice, the angel, all of it overwhelmed his senses. He did not walk down the mountain. He descended in haste, in awe, trembling with the weight of what had just occurred. He made his way through the quiet night streets of Mecca, back to his home, to the only person he could turn to with such an experience, his beloved wife Khadijah. She received him with concern and compassion. Seeing his face pale, his body trembling, she wrapped him in a cloak, trying to comfort him, to understand what had befallen him in the solitude of that mountain. Covered and surrounded by warmth, the prophet began to speak. He told her what he had seen, what he had heard, what he had felt. There was no exaggeration in his voice, no flourish, only truth and bewilderment. He feared for himself, not knowing what this encounter meant or what would come next. But Khadijah, a woman of immense wisdom and faith, believed in him before the world ever did. Her words were a balm. She reminded him of who he was, a man who upheld the ties of kinship, spoke only truth, bore the burdens of others, cared for the poor, honored guests, and supported all that was righteous. She saw not madness in his experience, but purpose. She did not dismiss what had happened, but embraced it, not with superstition or fear, but with understanding and reverence. Khadijah then took him to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned man familiar with the scriptures of the Torah and the Gospel. When Waraka heard what the prophet had described, he too did not hesitate. "What you saw," he said, "was the same angel who had come to Moses." This, he told him, was the beginning of something divine, and he warned him, "You will be rejected, hurt, driven out by your people, but you are the chosen one." The words confirmed what the prophet had begun to sense. His life would never be the same. In the days and nights that followed, the prophet was drawn into a new reality. He had been entrusted with the final message from God to mankind. No longer would he be merely a seeker? Now, he was the messenger. And the verses that had begun in a cave would continue to come over years, addressing not only matters of belief, but of justice, mercy, law, and love. Each revelation would be tailored to the needs of the moment, responding to questions, correcting behavior, guiding hearts. Yet that first night, Laylat al-Qadr remains the cornerstone. It was the night when divine light pierced earthly darkness. A single night, better than 1,000 months, as the Quran would later describe it. A night of decree, of transformation, of immense mercy. It was the night that re-established the direct connection between the Creator and His creation, a connection that had been fragmented across time and space since the days of earlier prophets. Now, it was whole again. The prophet would later describe that moment with deep emotion. The weight of revelation was often heavy, even when it descended on the coldest days. Sometimes he would sweat, even while shaded. Sometimes he would be silent, pausing to receive the words being placed in his heart. These were not inspirations of a poet or thoughts of a philosopher. These were divine truths, precise and protected, placed within him by the one who knows all. The power of that night echoes still. Every time a believer opens the Quran and reads its verses, the light of that night shines again. It continues to offer clarity to the confused, direction to the lost, and comfort to the weary. The command to read has not ceased. It calls out across centuries, across languages, across hearts. The cave is no longer needed, nor the mountain. The revelation is here, preserved, ready to speak to anyone who seeks its truth. The night of revelation was not merely a historical event. It was the beginning of a transformation that continues to this day. It marks the entry of divine wisdom into human affairs in its most perfect form. And though the moment was brief, its impact is eternal. In the silence of that mountain, amidst the rocks and stars, the heavens opened, and humanity was forever changed. The cave of Hira became a sacred place, not because of stone or earth, but because in it, the Word of God began its journey into the world, a journey that has not ended, a journey that continues every time the Quran is recited, lived, and loved. The Quran did not descend all at once. Unlike a single scroll delivered in totality, its revelation unfolded over a span of 23 years, moving with the rhythm of life, responding to the challenges of the moment, and meeting the needs of the growing Muslim community in real time. This gradual revelation was not a matter of delay, nor was it random. It was deliberate, wise, and deeply merciful. It reflected the infinite knowledge of the one who knows his creation better than they know themselves. Each verse came when it was most needed, each word carrying layers of meaning tailored to the emotional, spiritual, and social context in which it appeared. At the beginning of his mission, Prophet Muhammad stood alone, entrusted with a divine message in a city that clung to its idols and resisted change. Mecca, proud of its traditions and tribal lineage, did not welcome the call to monotheism with open arms. In these early days, the verses focused on building the foundations of faith, reminding people of the oneness of God, the certainty of the afterlife, the fate of previous nations, and the beauty of sincere worship. These early chapters, revealed in Mecca, were often short, rhythmic, and vivid. They pierced the heart with their imagery of paradise and hell, justice and mercy. For a people deeply attuned to the power of language, these verses struck a chord that could not be ignored. The purpose of this approach was to prepare the hearts of people. Before laws could be established, before communities could be governed, the soil of the soul had to be tilled. Belief had to take root. Character had to be shaped. The early revelations invited reflection, challenged the prevailing norms, and called individuals to awaken their inner conscience. They addressed the soul before they addressed society. This was not merely spiritual strategy. It was divine pedagogy. As the years passed and the small band of believers began to grow, so did the scope of the revelations. New verses came in response to specific events. When the Prophet and his followers were ridiculed, verses came to console. When the Muslims were persecuted, verses descended to strengthen their resolve. When the Prophet was questioned, verses arrived with answers that silenced critics and uplifted believers. The Quran thus became not just a book of guidance, but a living companion to the Muslim community, walking beside them as they navigated both personal and communal trials. One of the most compelling features of this gradual revelation is its responsiveness. It created a dynamic interaction between the divine and the daily. When a situation arose, the Prophet did not speculate or act on his own judgment. He waited. And when the revelation came, it addressed the matter with clarity, fairness, and often a profound simplicity that transcended the moment. Whether it was a question about inheritance, prayer, fasting, trade, marriage, or conflict, the Quran brought the answer. And that answer was never arbitrary. It always reflected a deeper principle rooted in justice, mercy, and divine wisdom. Take, for instance, the issue of alcohol. The Arabs of the time were deeply familiar with it. It was part of their culture and social life. Had the Quran prohibited it outright in the early stages, the command may have been too difficult to bear. But the divine approach was gradual. First, it pointed to the harm that alcohol causes. Then, it forbade its use during prayer. Finally, when the hearts were ready and the minds were clear, the complete prohibition was revealed. This stage method was not only practical, but compassionate. It showed how divine law considers human nature, allowing for transformation without coercion and reform without rebellion. The same pattern applied to many other aspects of life: interest-based lending, warfare, dietary laws, marital relations, and more. The Quran's rulings did not descend as a burdensome code, but as a guidance designed to elevate. It moved the community slowly, from darkness into light, from custom into principle, from habit into conscious worship. And each revelation built upon the last, creating a coherent and deeply layered message that unfolded like a symphony, each part harmonizing with the next. This slow descent also allowed the believers to internalize the message. The companions were not passive recipients. They were active learners, memorizing, reflecting, and implementing what they received. When a new verse was revealed, they would stop and absorb it, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. They would ask the Prophet about its meaning. They would adjust their actions. They would teach it to others. And only then would the next revelation come. This process made the Quran not just a text to be read, but a guide to be lived. The Prophet himself modeled this beautifully. He did not merely convey the words, he embodied them. His character became a living interpretation of the Quran, and his life a testament to its practicality. Through his example, the companions learned not just what to believe, but how to act. They saw the mercy of the Quran in his forgiveness, the justice of the Quran in his leadership, the compassion of the Quran in his treatment of the weak. And they followed suit. There were times when revelation paused. These were moments of silence, sometimes brief, sometimes long, and they too were filled with meaning. They taught the believers patience. They reminded them that guidance was not always immediate. Sometimes the answer required waiting, and in that waiting, faith was tested. The silence of revelation was not absence, it was preparation. And when the words finally came, they arrived with even greater weight and significance. The gradual nature of the Quran also confounded its critics. The disbelievers of Mecca asked why it did not come all at once, like a book written from start to finish. To this question, the Quran itself responded. It was sent in parts to strengthen the heart of the Prophet, to address the needs of the moment, and to be recited slowly, with reflection. This very structure became a proof of its divine origin. No human author, no matter how skilled, could produce a text over 2 decades, in varying circumstances, with perfect consistency in theme, tone, and message. The Quran's coherence, despite its episodic revelation, remains one of its most miraculous features. Even its language adapted to context. In Mecca, the tone was poetic, urgent, and lofty, calling to faith. In Medina, the tone shifted to legal, communal, and structured, guiding the growing Muslim society. But through all these shifts, its core message remained constant. Worship the one God, live with righteousness, prepare for the hereafter, and uphold justice in all things. As time progressed, the believers came to understand that the Quran was not only a book of sacred law, but a divine presence in their lives. Its verses would descend during moments of grief and moments of triumph. They would be heard on the battlefield and in the mosque, at weddings and at funerals, in moments of solitude and during public prayer. It became the fabric of their lives, woven into every joy and every hardship. The believers looked to it not just for instruction, but for healing, reassurance, and love. It was a living miracle. And part of that miracle was its ability to meet people where they were, and then gently raise them to where they could be. No soul was overwhelmed. No heart was burdened beyond its capacity. The revelation came like rain, falling in gentle drops, nourishing the soil, until the seeds of faith blossomed into a garden of truth. When the final verses were revealed, near the end of the prophet's life, they came with a sense of completion. Today, I have perfected your religion for you, and completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion. These words carried the weight of a journey fulfilled. The revelation had done its work. It had lifted hearts, reformed society, established justice, and connected earth to heaven once again. But its journey did not end with the last verse. The Quran's gradual revelation created a blueprint for how it should be approached for all time. Not rushed through, not read in haste, but absorbed slowly, lived deeply, and reflected upon daily. That tradition continues. Muslims around the world read it in small portions, day by day, chapter by chapter. They memorize a few lines at a time, let it settle into the heart, then move forward. It is not a book for passive reading. It is a guide that walks beside the believer, page by page, from the cradle to the grave. The gradual revelation of the Quran was a mercy, a miracle, and a method. It taught through presence, through timing, and through patience. It moved with the beat of life, and in doing so, transformed not just the individual, but the entire course of history. The divine voice, once heard in the stillness of the cave, continued to echo in the streets, in the homes, in the hearts. And to this day, it speaks, gently, gradually, perfectly. Long before printing presses and digital archives, the Quran found its way into the hearts of people through a remarkable and deeply sacred tradition: memorization. This oral transmission, known as hifz, is one of the most awe-inspiring aspects of the Quran's preservation and legacy. At its core lies a profound human connection, a relationship between divine words and living memory, between heavenly guidance and earthly guardianship. From the earliest days of Islam, when parchment was scarce and literacy limited, the Quran was committed to memory, letter by letter, word by word, verse by verse, in the minds of men, women, and children who heard it and embraced it. When the revelations first descended upon the Prophet Muhammad, they were not recorded in books or inscribed on walls. They were spoken aloud, received by the heart, and conveyed with the tongue. The Prophet himself was unlettered, yet his memory was divinely fortified to receive and retain the message exactly as it was revealed. As soon as he received revelation from Angel Jibril, he would recite it, and the words would imprint themselves in his soul. There was no hesitation in his transmission, no doubt in his delivery. What he spoke was not from his own mind, but from the source above all. And those who heard him, especially his closest companions, would listen with reverence, repeat the words, and begin the sacred task of memorizing them. The culture of Arabia at the time was deeply rooted in oral tradition. Poetry, stories, and genealogies were preserved through recitation, and individuals took great pride in their ability to memorize vast texts. This cultural foundation, combined with the spiritual weight of the Quran, made it entirely natural that the early Muslims would commit themselves to memorizing the revelation. They understood that these were not ordinary words. This was the speech of the Creator. And to carry it within was not just a privilege, it was a trust, a responsibility, and an act of love. The Prophet encouraged this memorization with passion and care. He would teach his companions the new verses as they were revealed, often repeating them several times so they could be properly retained. He appointed certain individuals as scribes, but the majority of preservation occurred through memorization. Some companions were especially known for their mastery of the Quran, such as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Zayd ibn Thabit. These men, among many others, became living repositories of divine revelation. They did not merely memorize the words, they understood their meanings, absorbed their guidance, and lived by their teachings. The oral tradition was not limited to scholars or elders. Children participated too. In fact, it became common for children to begin memorizing the Quran from a young age, starting with short chapters and gradually moving to longer ones. The rhythmic and melodic nature of Quranic recitation made it easier to memorize, and the repetition of daily prayers helped reinforce verses in the hearts of believers. Recitation was everywhere, in homes, in mosques, in the marketplace. The Quran was not confined to shelves or special occasions. It was lived, breathed, and heard throughout the day and night. Each verse committed to memory was like a seed planted in the heart. It grew with time, nourished by reflection, prayer, and understanding. Those who memorized the Quran were honored in the community, not because of status or wealth, but because they carried the word of God within them. Their hearts became vessels of divine light, and their lives were shaped by the message they held so closely. Memorization was never treated as mere repetition. It was accompanied by sincerity, humility, and a deep desire to embody what was learned. One of the most beautiful elements of this oral tradition is how it fostered unity and continuity. Even if copies of the Quran were lost or damaged, the words remained safe in the hearts of the people. If a mistake occurred during recitation, there were always others who could correct it, ensuring precision and preserving the exact wording as it was revealed. This collective memory acted like a spiritual net, catching and correcting any deviation before it could spread. Through this, the Quran was preserved not by the effort of one individual or institution, but by an entire community of believers, bonded together by their reverence for the sacred word. The Prophet, every year during Ramadan, would recite the Quran in full with the angel Jibril, reviewing all that had been revealed up to that point. In his final year, he reviewed it twice, a divine signal that the revelation was now complete. This practice of yearly review reinforced accuracy and set a precedent for future generations. It was not enough to memorize. The Quran had to be reviewed, recited aloud, and shared with others. Its transmission depended not only on internalizing the words, but on engaging with them actively, lovingly, and responsibly. When the Prophet passed away, his companions were not left with a mystery. They knew the Quran, they had memorized it, lived it, and taught it to others. Even as the Quran began to be compiled into a manuscript under the leadership of Abu Bakr, and later standardized during Uthman's caliphate, the oral tradition never waned. If anything, it became more important. Written texts were useful, but the human heart remained the primary means of preservation. A book can be burned or lost. A heart that carries the Quran remains lit even in darkness. Over the centuries, this tradition has continued without interruption. In every era, in every land where Islam reached, there were memorizers of the Quran. From the deserts of Arabia to the villages of West Africa, from the shores of Indonesia to the mountains of the Balkans, the Quran has been passed down through the breath of reciters and the devotion of students. This chain remains unbroken. A student today who memorizes the Quran can trace their line of transmission all the way back to the Prophet himself through a series of teachers, each of whom memorized and recited with precision. The impact of this cannot be overstated. It is one thing for a book to be preserved in libraries or databases. It is entirely another for it to be carried in the hearts of millions. The Quran is not only recited, it is lived. Its verses are recited in prayers, in gatherings, during funerals, weddings, celebrations, and quiet moments of solitude. Its recitation soothes the grieving, strengthens the weary, and uplifts the hopeful. Its memorization continues in madrasas, homes, and mosques, with children as young as 5 years old completing its memorization, guided by teachers who spend their lives preserving its beauty. The process of memorizing the Quran is one of discipline, love, and connection. It requires daily effort, revision, and patience. Yet those who undertake it often describe it as a journey of spiritual transformation. The words of God, when carried consistently and sincerely, begin to shape thoughts, behavior, and identity. The memorizer is not simply a person who knows the Quran. They become a reflection of its message. Their speech is softened by its wisdom, their heart comforted by its mercy, and their soul aligned with its light. And yet this miracle continues to unfold in the most ordinary of people. The Quran does not belong only to scholars. It is not reserved for the elite or the intellectual. It is open to all. Anyone with a sincere heart and steady effort can memorize the Quran. There are countless stories of shepherds, orphans, farmers, refugees, and prisoners who completed their memorization, some in the most difficult of circumstances, driven solely by their love for Allah and His book. This universality is another miracle. No other book in human history has been memorized in its entirety by so many people from such diverse backgrounds, without alteration, without revision. In times of war, famine, exile, and hardship, the Quran remained. Even when pages were scarce or schools were destroyed, the hearts of believers carried the revelation forward. This resilience, this spiritual defiance against time and trial, stands as a living proof of Allah's promise. Indeed, it is we who sent down the Quran, and indeed, we will be its guardian. The oral tradition is one of the ways through which that promise has been kept. In the modern world, despite the abundance of technology, this tradition is not fading. In fact, it continues to grow. Institutions around the world are dedicated to training new memorizers. Competitions are held to honor those who recite with precision and beauty. The science of tajwid, the rules of pronunciation and melody, has been refined and preserved. Every letter, every vowel, every pause is maintained, not as a matter of formality, but as an expression of devotion. When one listens to a skilled reciter of the Quran, what is heard is not simply a repetition of memorized lines. It is an unfolding of centuries of tradition, an echo of a voice that first trembled in a cave under the weight of revelation. It is a link to a prophet who bore the message with tears, with strength, and with unwavering trust in his Lord. And when that voice belongs to a child, speaking with purity and clarity, the miracle becomes even more evident. The revelation that once descended upon the mountains now lives in the hearts of the smallest believers. This is the power of the oral tradition and memorization of the Quran. It is not a relic of the past, but a living legacy. It is proof that divine guidance can be preserved not only in ink, but in breath, not only in books, but in hearts. It is a testament to the love that Muslims have for their scripture, and to the miraculous nature of a book that was sent down to be recited, remembered, and lived. The Quran's survival through memorization is not merely a fact, it is a gift, a wonder, and a mercy that continues to bless the world with every verse recited, every heart illuminated, and every soul drawn closer to the one who spoke it. The story of the Quran's written preservation is a remarkable testament to human devotion, divine guidance, and meticulous care. Though the Quran was primarily transmitted through memorization and oral tradition during the life of the Prophet Muhammad, it was also written down from the earliest days of its revelation. This dual method of preservation, both by heart and by hand, ensured that the Quran would be safeguarded not only through human memory, but also through physical records, allowing future generations to engage with the message in complete authenticity. The effort to record the Quran in written form began during the Prophet's lifetime, with scribes appointed to write down each new revelation as it descended, under his direct instruction and supervision. The environment in which the Quran was revealed was not one where books and scrolls were abundant. The Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century was largely an oral society. Literacy was limited, and writing materials were scarce. People preserved poetry, stories, and historical accounts through memorization, and this skill was highly developed and deeply valued. Despite the lack of widespread literacy, the Prophet took care to ensure that the Quran was recorded in writing. When a new verse was revealed, he would call upon his scribes, trusted companions who knew how to write, and dictate the words to them exactly as he received them from Angel Jibril. These scribes, including Zayd ibn Thabit, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and others, would then inscribe the verses using the materials available to them, such as palm leaves, parchment, leather, flat stones, bones, and pieces of wood. These early manuscripts were not compiled in book form. Rather, they existed as individual written fragments that corresponded with the revelations as they came down. Each verse or passage was placed in its proper location within the growing structure of the Quran, as directed by the Prophet himself. He did not leave this organization to chance or personal opinion. Instead, he provided clear guidance on where each new revelation should be placed, whether at the beginning of a surah, at the end, or in between other verses. This means that although the Quran was revealed gradually over a span of 23 years and in varying contexts, its final order was divinely orchestrated and prophetically instructed. The Prophet had a remarkable memory, and with the help of his scribes and companions, every revealed verse was accounted for. Still, he would not allow just anyone to record the Quran. He exercised great care, ensuring that those who wrote down the revelation were trustworthy, precise, and reverent. He would recite the verses slowly, clearly, and repeatedly, allowing the scribes to write carefully and the companions to memorize accurately. Once written, he would review the verses with them, confirming their accuracy. This process was not rushed. It was sacred. It was carried out with patience, dedication, and the deepest respect for the divine message. This practice continued throughout the Prophet's life. Whenever a verse was abrogated or replaced, the Prophet would instruct the scribes to remove or alter the relevant portion accordingly. Conversely, when a verse was confirmed to be part of the eternal scripture, he would ensure it was both memorized and written down properly. The companions were keenly aware of the importance of this work. They knew they were not merely recording religious instruction. They were preserving the speech of God himself. The Quran was not treated like any other text. Its words were recited with a unique cadence, approached with ritual purity, and handled with deep spiritual reverence. As the revelations accumulated, some companions took it upon themselves to gather the written fragments they had, compiling personal collections of verses based on their own memorization and records. These personal manuscripts were valuable references, but they were not yet complete copies of the entire Quran. Each companion's collection might contain different sections of the Quran, depending on which parts they had encountered or transcribed. Despite these variations, there was no doubt or disagreement regarding the authenticity of the verses themselves. The community of believers, bound by the oral tradition and the Prophet's oversight, was united in its understanding of what constituted the Quran. Toward the end of the Prophet's life, the Quran had been entirely revealed, memorized by hundreds, and partially written across various materials. During the final Ramadan of his life, the Prophet reviewed the Quran in full with the angel Jibril, not once but twice, a powerful sign that the revelation was complete and its preservation firmly established. This final review served as both a confirmation and a farewell. The Prophet had fulfilled his mission. The message was complete, and the responsibility of preserving it would now pass to the community he had nurtured. When the Prophet passed away, the written fragments remained scattered, preserved by various companions who had recorded and memorized them. Though the Quran was widely known by heart and partially recorded in writing, it had not yet been compiled into a single unified manuscript. This task would soon become urgent. During the Caliphate of Abu Bakr, just 2 years after the Prophet's death, a tragic and pivotal moment occurred. In the Battle of Yamama, a fierce conflict against false prophets and rebellion, a significant number of the companions who had memorized the Quran, known as the Hufaz, were martyred. This raised a serious concern. If so many of those who had committed the Quran to memory could be lost in a single battle, what would happen if more were to die in future conflicts? Would the oral tradition alone be enough to safeguard the Quran for future generations? It was Umar ibn al-Khattab who first approached Caliph Abu Bakr with the suggestion to compile the Quran into a single written manuscript to ensure its preservation. Initially, Abu Bakr hesitated. He was deeply mindful of the fact that the Prophet had never undertaken such a compilation himself, and he was wary of introducing something new. However, Umar persisted, emphasizing the necessity of the task and the risk of loss if they delayed. Eventually, Abu Bakr agreed, recognizing that preserving the Quran was not an innovation, but a continuation of the Prophet's mission. Zayd ibn Thabit, one of the Prophet's principal scribes and a brilliant scholar, was appointed to lead the effort. The task was immense and delicate. Zayd was instructed to collect every verse of the Quran from all available written fragments and to verify each one through the testimony of multiple reliable witnesses. Nothing would be accepted unless it was confirmed both through written record and oral memorization. This rigorous standard ensured that the integrity of the Quran was preserved in the most authentic way possible. Zayd described the task as more difficult than moving a mountain. He would travel throughout the community, gathering pieces of the Quran written on leather, bone, parchment, and palm leaves. He would cross-reference these with the memories of the companions who had memorized the text and with the Prophet's recitation during his lifetime. Every verse was placed with precision, every surah ordered exactly as it had been taught. The result of this monumental effort was a complete written manuscript of the Quran compiled into a single volume. This compiled copy was kept in the care of Abu Bakr, and upon his death, it was entrusted to Umar. After Umar's death, it passed to his daughter Hafsa, one of the Prophet's wives and a devout and respected guardian of the Quran. The manuscript remained safe, preserved under her protection, serving as the foundation for the next stage of preservation during the Caliphate of Uthman ibn Affan. The written preservation of the Quran is a story of extraordinary commitment. It was not a passive effort, nor a casual transcription. It was a deeply spiritual act undertaken by those who recognized the divine responsibility they bore. Each word was recorded with care, each verse reviewed with reverence, and each surah placed with deliberate intent. The companions knew that they were not merely writing history, they were preserving eternity. The Quran was not just to be read, it was to be safeguarded, handed down unchanged, and protected against the erosion of time and error. That initial manuscript, compiled under Abu Bakr's direction and Zayd's labor, became the reference point for all future copies. And though the Quran would later be standardized and reproduced under Uthman's leadership, the foundation was already strong, already rooted in the Prophet's instructions and the companions' unwavering dedication. The words that were first revealed in the solitude of the cave had now been collected into a single living document, written not on ordinary paper, but on the hearts and hands of those who believed with every fiber of their being that they were preserving the speech of their Lord. The written preservation of the Quran is not merely a historical achievement. It is a sacred trust fulfilled. It is the reason that today, more than 14 centuries later, a person in any corner of the world can open a copy of the Quran and read the exact same words that were revealed to a man in Mecca, recited in his home, memorized by his companions, and preserved by those who followed. It is a testament to divine protection, human faithfulness, and the miraculous endurance of a message that continues to guide, comfort, and inspire. The passing of the Prophet Muhammad marked a moment of immense sorrow and transition for the Muslim community. Not only had they lost their beloved messenger, but they were now faced with the responsibility of carrying forward the divine message he had delivered with such care, patience, and devotion over 23 years. Among the most critical duties that lay ahead was ensuring that the Quran, revealed in fragments, memorized by heart, and written across scattered materials, would be preserved in a complete and reliable form for future generations. While the Quran had been extensively memorized and partially recorded during the Prophet's lifetime, it had not yet been compiled into a single, bound manuscript. The weight of this task would fall upon the first caliph, Abu Bakr, and his companions, who recognized that they now stood as the custodians of a sacred trust. In the immediate aftermath of the Prophet's death, the community was reeling from grief. Leadership passed to Abu Bakr, a close friend and steadfast supporter of the Prophet, whose deep faith and gentle resolve made him the ideal figure to steer the nascent Ummah through its early challenges. However, within a short time, the young Muslim state found itself confronting rebellion and false prophets in various regions. These threats culminated in a series of battles, the most notable being the Battle of Yamama. It was a fierce confrontation between the Muslims and the forces of Musaylima, a man who falsely claimed prophethood. Though the Muslims ultimately triumphed, the victory came at a heavy cost. A large number of those who had memorized the Quran, known as Hufaz, were martyred in the battle. The deaths of these memorizers shook the community to its core. Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the Prophet's closest companions and a man of profound foresight, quickly realized the gravity of what had occurred. He saw that the oral preservation of the Quran, while strong and widespread, could be endangered if such losses continued. The death of so many Hufaz in a single battle served as a warning, a wake-up call that action had to be taken. If more of these guardians of the Quran were lost in future conflicts, the risk of forgetting or distorting the divine text would grow. Umar approached Abu Bakr with a proposal that would eventually become one of the most important undertakings in Islamic history: the compilation of the entire Quran into one written volume. Initially, Abu Bakr hesitated. The Prophet had never compiled the Quran into a single book, and Abu Bakr was wary of doing anything that the Prophet himself had not explicitly done. He feared being responsible for introducing something new into the religion. But Umar persisted, reminding him that this was not a matter of innovation, but preservation. The Quran was already written in parts and memorized by many, but bringing it together in one official, comprehensive manuscript would ensure its survival and protect it from loss or corruption. It was, in truth, a continuation of the Prophet's mission, carried out in a new context that demanded proactive stewardship. After considerable reflection and prayer, Abu Bakr agreed, and the project began. To carry out this monumental task, Abu Bakr turned to Zayd ibn Thabit, a young but highly respected companion who had served as one of the Prophet's primary scribes. Zayd had memorized the Quran and had been present during many of the Prophet's recitations. He was known for his intelligence, reliability, and deep commitment to accuracy. When he was summoned for the task, Zayd himself expressed hesitation. He described the undertaking as more difficult than moving a mountain. The responsibility of compiling the very words of God, ensuring their accuracy, arrangement, and authenticity, weighed heavily on him. Yet he accepted the task, knowing that the trust placed upon him was both an honor and an obligation. Zayd approached the compilation with meticulous care. He did not rely solely on memory, even though he and many others had memorized the Quran in full. Instead, he set a strict standard. Every verse had to be verified through both oral transmission and written documentation. He called upon the community, inviting those who had fragments of the Quran, written on palm leaves, leather, bones, or parchment, to come forward. Each piece was examined, and no verse was accepted into the final compilation unless it was confirmed by at least 2 trustworthy witnesses who had heard it directly from the Prophet. This rigorous method ensured not only accuracy but community consensus. The companions responded with reverence. They searched their homes, their belongings, and their memories, bringing forth pieces of revelation they had preserved. They did not consider it a chore, but a sacred contribution to one of the most significant acts of preservation in their faith. Verses came together, piece by piece, verified and cross-checked, until the full compilation was complete. Zayd and his team took special care to maintain the precise order of verses and chapters, as instructed by the Prophet during his lifetime. Though the Quran was not revealed in chronological order, its final structure was divinely guided, and the companions honored that arrangement with unwavering diligence. When the compilation was complete, the manuscript, known as the Mushaf, was presented to Caliph Abu Bakr. It represented the collective memory, labor, and devotion of the early Muslim community. For the first time, the entire Quran was preserved in one physical document, authenticated through both memorization and manuscript, under the guidance of those who had witnessed its revelation firsthand. This Mushaf was then entrusted to Umar after Abu Bakr's passing, and later, it came into the care of Umar's daughter, Hafsa bint Umar, who had been one of the Prophet's wives and a knowledgeable woman with deep understanding of the Quran. The preservation of the Quran in written form marked a turning point. It meant that even if future generations were cut off from the Hufaz, they would still have access to the complete and unchanged revelation. It provided a reference against which all future recitations and copies could be compared. It anchored the faith in a text that was both spiritually alive and materially secure. Yet even after this compilation, the oral tradition remained vibrant. The written text did not replace memorization, it reinforced it. Reciters continued to teach, students continued to memorize, and the Quran continued to live not only in books, but in hearts. The written compilation and the oral tradition worked together like 2 wings of the same bird, ensuring that the Quran could soar through centuries with integrity and purity. Years later, during the Caliphate of Uthman ibn Affan, the need for standardization became urgent. As Islam spread beyond the Arabian Peninsula into Persia, the Levant, and North Africa, people from different regions with varying dialects began to recite the Quran with subtle differences in pronunciation and reading style. Though these variations were rooted in the linguistic diversity permitted by the Prophet himself, Uthman feared that misunderstandings or disputes might arise, especially among new Muslims unfamiliar with the authentic methods of recitation. To address this, he requested the original Mushaf from Hafsa and commissioned a team, again led by Zayd ibn Thabit, to produce several identical copies of the Quran based on the Qurayshi dialect, the dialect of the Prophet. Once these standardized copies were complete, Uthman distributed them to the major cities of the Islamic world, including Mecca, Medina, Kufa, Basra, and Damascus. He also ordered that all unofficial or partial copies that did not match the official recension be destroyed. This was not an act of censorship, but one of preservation. Uthman's goal was to unify the Muslim Ummah upon the correct and consistent recitation of the Quran, avoiding division and confusion. The act was widely accepted by the companions and became one of the most enduring contributions to the preservation of the holy text. The compiled Quran, preserved first under Abu Bakr and then standardized under Uthman, has remained unchanged to this day. Not a single verse has been altered, not a single word removed or added. The words that were revealed in the stillness of the night, carried by the angel Jibril, recited by the Prophet, and memorized by his companions, are the same words recited by millions of Muslims around the world today. It is a miracle not just of language, but of divine promise, fulfilled through human effort guided by heavenly will. This compilation after the Prophet's death was not merely an administrative task. It was a spiritual achievement of immense magnitude. It reflected the love the companions had for their faith, the reverence they had for their Prophet, and the trust they placed in God's word. Through hardship, war, and grief, they came together to protect the most precious gift they had received. And through their efforts, the Quran became not only a light for their generation, but a lantern for every generation to come. In parchment and in hearts, the revelation was secured, and its message destined to echo forever. As the Islamic Empire expanded beyond the borders of Arabia, Islam spread swiftly into Persia, Byzantium, Egypt, and across North Africa. With every newly conquered region, more people embraced the faith, many of whom came from vastly different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Arabic, the language of the Quran, was not native to many of these new Muslims. Although the early converts were eager to learn and recite the Quran, their efforts were often influenced by the local dialects and linguistic habits they brought with them. The Prophet Muhammad had permitted variations in pronunciation among Arab tribes when reciting the Quran, accommodating the natural differences in dialects that existed within the Arabian Peninsula. This flexibility had served the community well during his lifetime. However, with the rapid growth of the Muslim world and the influx of new believers unfamiliar with the subtleties of Arabic, a dangerous confusion began to emerge. What had once been a unifying oral tradition began to reveal potential for division. As Muslims from different regions gathered to pray or to study the Quran together, their recitations sometimes differed, not in meaning, but in pronunciation, word choice, and dialectal forms. Though these differences had all been acceptable during the Prophet's time, they began to cause disputes among those less informed. Each group believed its version to be the most authentic, and tensions began to rise. The situation grew so concerning that arguments and accusations of incorrect recitation threatened the unity of the Ummah, the global Muslim community that had been so carefully cultivated through shared belief and common purpose. It was during this time that Caliph Uthman ibn Affan assumed leadership of the Muslim world. Known for his piety, generosity, and administrative insight, Uthman was deeply committed to the unity and spiritual integrity of the Muslim community. He had already served as a close companion of the Prophet, and his reverence for the Quran was unmatched. When the reports of disputes over Quranic recitation reached him, he recognized the seriousness of the issue immediately. The Quran, the divine guidance and the foundation of Islamic life, could not become a source of division. Uthman knew that action had to be taken, not to restrict the flexibility once allowed by the Prophet, but to safeguard the unity and clarity of the Quran for generations to come. Uthman's solution was both bold and far-sighted. He decided that a single standardized version of the Quran should be compiled and distributed throughout the Islamic world. This official text would be based on the dialect of the Quraysh tribe, the dialect in which the Quran had originally been revealed to the Prophet. By doing so, Uthman sought to unify the pronunciation and textual reading of the Quran across the vast and diverse empire. He was not attempting to suppress the other modes of recitation allowed by the Prophet, but rather to prevent confusion and maintain consistency at a time when written texts were beginning to be used more widely for teaching and recitation. To carry out this monumental task, Uthman turned once again to Zayd ibn Thabit, the Prophet's former scribe, and the man who had overseen the initial compilation of the Quran during Abu Bakr's caliphate. Zayd was not only deeply familiar with the Quran, but also held in high esteem for his precision, trustworthiness, and scholarly capabilities. Uthman appointed him to lead a committee of respected companions, including Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Sa'id ibn al-As, and Abdur Rahman ibn al-Harith. These men, all from the Quraysh tribe, were chosen for their knowledge of the Quran and their linguistic fluency in the dialect of revelation. The process began with the retrieval of the original manuscript compiled during Abu Bakr's time, which had been safeguarded by Hafsa bint Umar, the daughter of Caliph Umar and a wife of the Prophet. With her consent, the manuscript was brought forward and served as the primary source for the new standardized copies. The committee began its work with care, reverence, and unwavering commitment to accuracy. They reviewed each verse, comparing it with their own memorization, the testimonies of other companions, and the written record, ensuring that nothing was omitted, added, or changed. The final text reflected the exact wording and arrangement as taught by the Prophet, in the dialect that had first carried the divine message to humanity. Once the standardized copies were completed, Uthman ordered several official mushafs to be created and sent to the major cities of the Muslim world, including Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. These cities were not only political and cultural centers, but also places where large populations of Muslims lived, taught, and learned. Each copy was accompanied by a qualified teacher or reciter, someone deeply versed in the Quran, who could ensure that the correct recitation was preserved and taught. This combination of written manuscript and oral instruction maintained the dual method of preservation that had always characterized the Quran. Alongside the distribution of the official copies, Uthman gave a command that any unofficial or personal manuscripts that differed in wording or dialect should be destroyed. This was not an act of erasing valid diversity, but rather a preventative measure to stop the spread of confusion and to anchor the Ummah to a single, universally accepted text. The companions, including those who had their own written copies, accepted Uthman's decision without objection. They understood the intention behind his actions. It was not about authority or control. It was about protecting the Book of God from distortion, misunderstanding, and division. Uthman's decision proved to be one of the most crucial moments in the history of the Quran's preservation. From that point forward, every written copy of the Quran, in every corner of the world, has been based on the Uthmanic Codex. The meticulous work of Zayd and his committee ensured that the text would remain intact, letter for letter, word for word, exactly as it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. The miracle of the Quran's preservation, foretold in the verse promising that God himself would guard it, manifested in part through this extraordinary effort. Despite the widespread adoption of the standardized text, the diversity in recitation was not lost. The Prophet had taught the Quran in multiple accepted qira'at, modes of recitation that differed slightly in pronunciation, rhythm, and sometimes even word choice, without altering the meaning. These variations were preserved through oral transmission, passed down through authenticated chains of reciters. Uthman's standardization did not eliminate these qira'at, but rather provided a stable script that could accommodate them. The Uthmanic Codex was written without diacritical marks or vowel indicators, allowing multiple valid readings to coexist, as long as they were backed by a reliable chain of transmission and consistent with the written text. Over time, as the Arabic language evolved and new Muslims unfamiliar with its grammatical rules began to study the Quran, scholars developed the system of dots and vowel signs to assist with proper pronunciation. These additions were not changes to the original text, but tools to preserve the original recitation in the face of expanding linguistic diversity. The base text compiled under Uthman remained untouched, and the science of tajweed, rules for proper Quranic recitation, emerged to further protect the precise manner in which the Quran was to be read. The legacy of Uthman's standardization is visible today in every Quran recited, printed, or memorized. Whether in Istanbul or Jakarta, Cairo or London, the Quran remains consistent, unchanged, and protected. It is a miracle not just of divine revelation, but of human dedication guided by divine purpose. The decisions made during Uthman's caliphate ensured that, even as the Muslim world grew in number, language, and geography, it would remain united by a single, preserved scripture. Uthman's commitment to the Quran cost him dearly. Toward the end of his life, he was besieged by political unrest and opposition, yet he remained steadfast. It is said that in his final moments, when rebels broke into his home, he was sitting with the Quran in front of him, reading its verses with love and devotion. Blood from his wounds fell upon the sacred pages, a haunting and powerful image of a man who had given everything to protect the Book of God. His martyrdom did not extinguish his legacy. On the contrary, it solidified it. The Quran he helped preserve became a shield against distortion, a light in the darkness, and a symbol of unity for all who followed. Uthman's efforts, driven by sincerity and foresight, ensured that the words revealed in a cave to a single man would reach billions unchanged, undiluted, and undivided. The standardization of the Quran was not just a historical event. It was a fulfillment of divine promise, a reflection of prophetic wisdom, and a triumph of collective faith. Through Uthman's leadership, the Ummah was anchored to a text that would endure through centuries, revolutions, and empires. And today, when a child in any corner of the world opens a mushaf and recites its verses with clarity and reverence, they continue the legacy of that sacred work, echoing a trust that began with revelation and was preserved with love, sacrifice, and divine protection. From the moment the first verses of the Quran were revealed in the quiet solitude of the cave of Hira, it was clear that its message was not confined to a single people, place, or time. Though it was revealed in 7th century Arabia, in the Arabic language and to an Arab man, the Quran's message transcended tribal boundaries, regional affiliations, and cultural distinctions. It spoke a universal truth that echoed across generations and reached into the hearts of individuals regardless of their background. Its power did not come from political dominance or cultural enforcement, but from the timeless relevance of its teachings, the clarity of its moral compass, and the deep resonance it created in the human soul. The Quran addresses itself to all of humanity. Its verses do not merely speak to Muslims. They begin with appeals to humankind at large. The phrase, "O mankind," appears repeatedly throughout its pages, calling attention to the fact that its guidance is meant for every human being, not just a specific ethnic group or religious community. This inclusivity was a profound departure from the prevailing worldview in many societies at the time, which often saw divine favor or moral superiority as the exclusive right of a particular tribe, class, or race. In contrast, the Quran declared unequivocally that all humans are created from a single soul, that no one is superior to another except in righteousness, and that the earth is a shared trust for all its inhabitants. This universal vision is rooted in the Quran's conception of God as the Lord of all worlds. He is not the God of the Arabs alone or the Muslims alone, but the creator, sustainer, and judge of all beings. This understanding sets the tone for the rest of the revelation. If God is universal, then his message must be as well. And so the Quran offers guidance on matters that are common to human experience. Questions of justice, mercy, purpose, suffering, community, love, and responsibility. It does not merely focus on ritual observance or theological abstraction, but delves deeply into how human beings are to live with one another, how they are to treat the earth, how they are to manage wealth and power, and how they are to cultivate inner peace. The ethical framework of the Quran is built on values that resonate across time and culture. Justice is one of its central pillars. The Quran commands fairness in speech and action, even when it concerns enemies or one's own kin. It teaches that justice must be upheld regardless of wealth or status, that favoritism and corruption are forms of betrayal, and that God is always watching the intentions behind actions. Mercy and forgiveness are likewise emphasized throughout the Quran, not as weaknesses, but as divine qualities that humans are encouraged to emulate. The balance between justice and mercy is a reflection of the balance the Quran strikes in its approach to human life, recognizing the reality of wrongdoing, but also the potential for redemption. The Quran speaks powerfully to the rights of the marginalized. It places great emphasis on caring for the orphan, the widow, the traveler, and the poor. These groups, often neglected in society, are mentioned repeatedly as recipients of compassion and assistance. Charity is not presented as a supererogatory act, but as an obligation, a purification of one's wealth, and a test of one's sincerity. The Quran teaches that true faith is not measured by words or rituals alone, but by the willingness to serve those in need, and to stand up for those who are voiceless. In doing so, it anchors its spiritual teachings in tangible acts of goodness. Even in matters of warfare, the Quran lays down strict ethical guidelines. Fighting is permitted only in self-defense or against oppression, and even then, it urges restraint, forgiveness, and the pursuit of peace whenever possible. Civilians are to be protected, treaties honored, and prisoners treated with dignity. The objective is not conquest or domination, but the removal of tyranny and the establishment of justice. These principles set the Quran apart from the brutal norms of war that existed at the time and continue to challenge those who seek to manipulate religion for violence. The Quran's universality also shines through its acknowledgement of religious diversity. It recognizes the prophets and scriptures of previous communities, including Moses, Jesus, Abraham, and others. It affirms that all these messengers came with the same core message: to worship the one God, to live righteously, and to prepare for the hereafter. The Quran does not present Islam as a new religion, but as a continuation and culmination of the divine message revealed throughout history. In this sense, it positions itself not in opposition to previous faiths, but as their fulfillment. The believers are told not to insult others' objects of worship and to engage with followers of other religions in ways that are just, respectful, and rooted in shared values. This attitude is reflected in the Quran's vision of humanity as diverse but interconnected. The verse that declares God created people into nations and tribes so that they may know one another is a profound reminder that diversity is not a flaw, but a divine design. The differences in language, skin color, and culture are signs of God's creative power, not grounds for superiority or division. The Quran acknowledges that people will always differ in belief, and it calls for engagement through wisdom, patience, and gentle preaching, not coercion. It firmly establishes that there is no compulsion in religion, for faith must be embraced freely, not forced. At the same time, the Quran calls individuals to personal responsibility. It repeatedly emphasizes that each soul is accountable for its own actions, that no one can bear the burden of another, and that success in the hereafter is based on sincerity, effort, and adherence to truth. This sense of moral agency empowers individuals to rise above their circumstances, to pursue knowledge and virtue, and to contribute to the betterment of society. It encourages self-examination and growth, urging believers to purify their intentions, to control their anger, to forgive others, and to remain humble in both success and failure. One of the Quran's most enduring qualities is its capacity to speak to people in different situations and at different stages of life. A verse that comforts the grieving may inspire strength in the oppressed. A verse that warns the arrogant may awaken humility in the heart of a leader. Its layers of meaning reveal themselves through reflection, and its language adapts itself to the needs of the moment without changing its core message. This is part of what makes the Quran a living book, a guide that walks with its reader, offering wisdom that is always relevant. The Quran also speaks directly to the heart, using powerful imagery, rhetorical questions, and stories to convey its messages. It does not merely issue commands, but explains the reasoning behind them, appealing to both reason and emotion. The stories of past prophets and communities serve not just as historical lessons, but as spiritual mirrors. They reveal the patterns of human behavior, the cycles of arrogance and repentance, oppression and deliverance, and offer guidance for navigating one's own journey. These stories are universal in their appeal, capturing the struggles and aspirations that define the human experience. In its vision of society, the Quran advocates for balance. It rejects extremes and encourages a middle path, a life of moderation, where spiritual devotion is harmonized with worldly responsibility. It values knowledge, urging believers to reflect on the signs in the universe, the intricacies of creation, and the patterns of history. It promotes family, community, and mutual rights, recognizing that human beings thrive in relationships rooted in justice, compassion, and trust. Yet it never loses sight of the individual's relationship with God, emphasizing that every human heart has a direct connection to the divine, unmediated by status, wealth, or hierarchy. This universality is perhaps most visible in the way the Quran continues to shape lives across the globe today. Whether recited in the stillness of a rural village or in the bustle of a modern city, its words resonate with power. People from all walks of life find in its verses a sense of direction, a source of solace, and a call to higher purpose. Converts often describe their first encounter with the Quran as a moment of awakening, a realization that these ancient words somehow knew their questions, fears, and hopes. For born Muslims, the Quran is a companion from childhood to old age, offering new insights at every stage of life. Despite differences in culture, language, and interpretation, the Quran unites over 1 billion people in a shared framework of belief and practice. It creates a sense of belonging that transcends geography and ethnicity, binding hearts together in a common spiritual journey. It is recited in every corner of the earth, in the same words revealed 14 centuries ago, preserved through both memory and manuscript. Its universality is not only in its reach, but in its essence. A book that speaks to the human soul in its most honest moments, that calls to justice when injustice is easy, that inspires humility when pride takes root, and that offers hope even in despair. In a world often fractured by division and distracted by noise, the Quran remains a source of clarity and unity. It invites all who hear its message to reflect, to question, to seek truth, and to find peace, not in fleeting pleasures or shallow identities, but in the eternal connection between the human heart and its creator. This is the heart of its universal message, that every human being, regardless of origin or circumstance, is invited to walk a path of light, guided by words that never grow old, words that continue to whisper mercy, wisdom, and truth across the centuries. The Quran, while primarily a book of spiritual guidance, has long intrigued scholars, scientists, and seekers with its references to the natural world and historical events. Revealed in the 7th century to a man who could neither read nor write, the Quran addresses matters far beyond the immediate cultural and intellectual context of its time. Within its verses are descriptions of phenomena in embryology, astronomy, geology, oceanography, and historical accounts that align with modern discoveries or contain insights unknown to the people of that era. These elements have led many to reflect on the Quran as not only a book of divine guidance but also a source of scientific and historical insight that confirms its claim of divine origin. The Quran encourages reflection on the natural world. It urges humanity to ponder the skies, the earth, the alternation of night and day, the winds, the rain, the mountains, and the stars. These reflections are not presented as dry observations, but as invitations to recognize the signs of the Creator. The word signs, or ayat in Arabic, is used both for the verses of the Quran and the natural wonders in creation. This dual use underscores the Quran's emphasis on a unified understanding of revelation and the world, where both scripture and nature point toward the same truth. One of the most striking areas where the Quran aligns with modern scientific knowledge is in its description of human embryonic development. In a time when scientific instruments were virtually non-existent and theories of human development were speculative at best, the Quran provided detailed accounts of the stages through which a human being is formed in the womb. It describes the transformation from a drop of fluid to a clinging substance to a chewed-like lump, and then into bones clothed with flesh. These stages mirror what is now known in modern embryology. The terms used are precise, descriptive, and remarkably accurate, especially considering the era in which they were revealed. While the primary purpose of these verses is to inspire awe at the Creator's design, the scientific accuracy embedded within them has drawn the attention of medical professionals and embryologists, some of whom have publicly acknowledged the Quran's insights as astonishing. Beyond human biology, the Quran also speaks of the universe with language that resonates with discoveries made many centuries later. It speaks of the expanding nature of the heavens, a concept aligned with the modern understanding of an expanding universe, first proposed by astronomers in the 20th century. It mentions the orbits of celestial bodies, including the sun and the moon, suggesting a system of movement rather than static placement. It also describes the protective function of the atmosphere, referring to a protected roof that shields the Earth, which modern science understands as the role of the atmosphere in blocking harmful radiation and regulating temperature. Another fascinating reference in the Quran is its description of the layers of darkness found in the depths of the ocean, a phenomenon unknown at the time of revelation. The Quran mentions darkness upon darkness in deep waters, where even the hand cannot be seen. Such conditions are only found at depths beyond the reach of sunlight, a fact that was only confirmed with the advent of deep-sea exploration using modern technology. Similarly, the Quran mentions the barrier between two bodies of water that do not mix completely, such as where fresh and salt water meet. These areas, known as estuaries, exhibit distinct properties, including differences in temperature, salinity, and density that prevent complete mixing. The existence of such barriers was not widely known in the Prophet's time and required later scientific investigation to fully understand. In the realm of geology, the Quran describes mountains as pegs or stakes, suggesting that they have roots and function to stabilize the earth. Modern geological studies have confirmed that many mountains do indeed have deep roots, and that tectonic activity plays a significant role in maintaining the Earth's balance. The imagery used in the Quran of mountains as pegs evokes this unseen aspect of their structure, something that was not observable without the tools of modern science. Time and again, the Quran calls attention to the water cycle, describing the process of evaporation, cloud formation, rainfall, and the role of rain in reviving the earth. While these processes may seem common knowledge today, they were not fully understood in the 7th century. The Quran's explanation of rain as coming from the sky, forming clouds, falling in measured amounts, and penetrating the soil to nourish vegetation, provides a remarkably accurate portrayal of the hydrological cycle. It even touches on the idea of winds fertilizing the clouds, a process that aligns with the concept of condensation nuclei, which assist in rain formation. These scientific references are not presented in the Quran as lessons in physics or biology, but as signs pointing toward the wisdom, power, and knowledge of the Creator. The Quran does not seek to replace scientific inquiry, but to inspire it. It invites humanity to look closely at creation, to question, to learn, and to recognize in the complexity and order of the universe the hand of a designer. This encouragement to seek knowledge laid the foundation for centuries of scientific advancement in the Muslim world, particularly during the Golden Age of Islam, when scholars built upon Quranic inspiration to pursue studies in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, chemistry, and engineering. Alongside its scientific insights, the Quran also contains numerous historical references that have puzzled and fascinated scholars for generations. One such account is the story of the Pharaoh and Moses. The Quran states that Pharaoh's body would be preserved as a sign for future generations. At the time, the idea of preserving a body was not unique, as ancient Egyptians practiced mummification. However, the specific claim that Pharaoh's body would be preserved and discovered later was not widely understood or proven until the modern age. In the 19th century, the mummified body of a pharaoh, believed by some scholars to be the ruler during the time of Moses, was discovered and placed in museums, fulfilling a literal interpretation of the verse. The Quran also contains precise references to ancient peoples and civilizations, such as the Ad, Thamud, and the people of the cave. Archaeological discoveries in recent centuries have confirmed the existence of such civilizations, including their practices, their architecture, and their sudden demise. The Quran speaks of these peoples in the context of moral lessons, warning against arrogance, injustice, and denial of divine guidance. Yet its descriptions of their locations, structures, and fates align with historical and geological findings that validate the accuracy of these accounts. Another example lies in the account of the defeat and subsequent victory of the Romans mentioned in the early verses of Surah Ar-Rum. At the time the Quran was revealed, the Romans had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Persians, and their future seemed bleak. Yet the Quran confidently predicted that the Romans would soon be victorious within a few years. This prophecy was fulfilled when the Romans defeated the Persians in a stunning reversal of fortune, exactly within the time frame stated in the Quran. The accuracy of this prediction, against all odds, added to the awe felt by those who had witnessed both the revelation and the event. The Quran does not present these scientific and historical references as proofs in the modern empirical sense, but as signs, reminders that the one who speaks these words has knowledge beyond human capacity. These verses are not given to satisfy curiosity, but to awaken the heart, to stir the soul into recognizing that there is more to life than what can be seen. They invite readers to approach the Quran not merely as a book of religion, but as a portal to understanding themselves, their world, and their Creator. Many scholars throughout history have commented on the remarkable harmony between the Quran and the natural order. They observe that while other scriptures may have suffered alterations or reinterpretations, the Quran remained consistent, its meanings unfolding in deeper layers as human knowledge advanced. What was once a mystery in a verse might later be illuminated by a discovery in science or a breakthrough in history. And yet, the verse never changes, only the understanding of it grows. This dynamic relationship between revelation and discovery continues to draw new readers to the Quran, prompting reflection and humility in the face of its timeless relevance. To view the Quran as a scientific textbook would be to misunderstand its purpose. It is not a catalog of facts, but a guide for the heart and mind. Yet, the presence of accurate descriptions of natural and historical realities reinforces the claim that the Quran is not the product of a human mind limited by its time and place. Instead, it is the speech of the one who created time and knows all places. The scientific and historical miracles of the Quran are not isolated wonders. They are part of a broader pattern of truth that runs through every verse, every surah, every word, inviting humanity to believe, not through blind acceptance, but through reflection, observation, and awe. As the world continues to advance in knowledge and understanding, the Quran remains a source of inspiration, offering not only moral guidance, but also intellectual challenges. Its verses continue to be studied not only by theologians, but also by scientists, historians, and linguists, all drawn by the depth and precision of its language. In this ever-evolving journey of exploration, the Quran stands as a constant reminder that knowledge, when guided by humility and sincerity, can lead not only to worldly insight, but to spiritual awakening. The Quran, in both its outward arrangement and its inner dimensions, is unlike any other book. It does not follow the linear narrative structure found in most historical or literary texts. There is no chronological order in the traditional sense, no straightforward storyline from beginning to end. Instead, the Quran is arranged in a way that transcends time and space, weaving together themes, stories, laws, prayers, parables, and reflections in a tapestry that defies simplistic categorization. To some, especially first-time readers expecting a conventional book, this structure may seem puzzling. But to those who spend time with the Quran, reflecting on its rhythm, tone, and wisdom, the structure reveals an intentional depth, one that is both divine in origin and perfect in design. At the surface level, the Quran is composed of 114 chapters, known as surahs, each varying in length, content, and tone. Some are just a few verses long, while others span several pages. The longest chapter, Al-Baqarah, comprises 286 verses, whereas the shortest, Al-Kawthar, has only 3. These chapters are not arranged chronologically according to their revelation, but rather in an order divinely preserved and transmitted through the Prophet Muhammad. The earlier Meccan chapters tend to focus on the fundamental tenets of faith, the oneness of God, the reality of the hereafter, the mission of the prophets, and the spiritual condition of the soul. The later, Medinan chapters include more detailed legislative guidance, social principles, and instructions for the developing Muslim community. Yet, even within a single chapter, the themes may shift from legal rulings to moral exhortations, from cosmic signs to historical recountings, from stern warnings to intimate consolations, all within a seamless flow that invites contemplation rather than confusion. This non-linear structure is not a flaw, but a feature of the Quran's unique mode of communication. It reflects the reality of human experience, where life rarely unfolds in neat, organized compartments. Just as people experience joy and sorrow, hope and fear, confusion and clarity, often in rapid succession, the Quran mirrors this psychological and spiritual ebb and flow. It speaks to the heart as much as to the intellect, addressing the soul's needs moment by moment. This dynamic arrangement enables the Quran to engage readers in any situation, allowing its verses to resonate differently depending on the context of one's life. Repetition in the Quran is one of the most profound aspects of its structure. Certain verses, themes, and phrases appear again and again, often with slight variations. The story of Moses, for instance, is told in numerous chapters, each time with different details, perspectives, or emphases. These repetitions are not redundant. They serve a purpose. They reinforce key lessons, allow for deeper understanding, and accommodate the varying states of the listener. A verse that may pass unnoticed in one recitation may strike deeply in another, depending on the listener's emotional or spiritual state. This method of layered repetition deepens engagement and allows the Quran to be both familiar and ever-renewing. The Quran also employs a powerful literary technique known as ring composition or chiastic structure, where themes are introduced, developed, and then revisited in reverse order, creating a mirrored framework. This intricate design is not always immediately apparent, but careful study reveals a remarkable symmetry and coherence. Chapters such as Al-Baqarah and Al-Kahf display this feature, where the beginning and end echo one another, and central themes are framed by supporting ideas. This structural harmony reinforces the Quran's divine origin, as it would be nearly impossible for an unlettered man, without any formal education or access to texts, to produce such literary sophistication spontaneously over a 23-year period. Another feature that contributes to the depth of the Quran is its use of parables and analogies. These literary devices are employed to convey complex spiritual and moral truths in a way that is accessible and memorable. The parable of the spider's web, for example, illustrates the fragility of relying on false deities. The image of a good word being like a good tree, whose roots are firm and branches reach to the sky, offers a vision of enduring faith and positive influence. These metaphors are not mere poetic flourishes. They are windows into deeper realities. They invite the reader to ponder, to interpret, and to draw lessons that remain relevant across time and culture. In addition to literary sophistication, the Quran also exhibits a depth of meaning that unfolds through layered interpretation. Classical Islamic scholars developed a tradition of tafsir, or exegesis, that sought to uncover the meanings embedded within the text. Some verses have clear, immediate meanings, while others contain symbolic, allegorical, or esoteric dimensions. Scholars distinguish between the apparent, zahir, and the hidden, batin, meanings of the Quran, acknowledging that the divine word could carry multiple levels of truth simultaneously. This depth ensures that the Quran remains a source of guidance for people of all intellectual and spiritual capacities. A child may grasp a lesson of obedience or kindness from a verse, while a seasoned scholar may extract legal, theological, or philosophical insights from the same words. The Quran also speaks in a language of precision and power. Its Arabic is considered the pinnacle of eloquence, unmatched in rhythm, word choice, and rhetorical force. Even those unfamiliar with Arabic often sense a unique musicality in its recitation, a cadence that moves the listener emotionally. The Quran's language is simultaneously simple and profound, using everyday words to convey eternal truths. Its verses often end with rhymed prose, creating a sonic unity that enhances memorization and reflection. This oral quality of the Quran is essential to its structure, as it was revealed and transmitted through sound. Hearing the Quran is as important as reading it, and its impact is often felt most deeply through recitation. The Quran's organization into verses and chapters also serves spiritual and practical purposes. The division into 30 equal parts, known as ajza, allows the Quran to be recited in its entirety over a month, particularly during Ramadan. The division into quarters and eighths aids memorization and study. These structural elements help integrate the Quran into the daily life of believers, making it accessible in portions that can be recited during prayer, studied in groups, or reflected upon in solitude. Yet for all its divisions and arrangements, the Quran maintains a seamless unity. Its central themes, belief in one God, the accountability of the soul, the guidance of revelation, the stories of the prophets, the signs of creation, the call to justice and compassion, are interwoven throughout the text. No matter where one opens the Quran, these messages are present, reinforcing the coherence and unity of its vision. This thematic unity, sustained across hundreds of verses revealed in different circumstances over 2 decades, is itself a sign of the Quran's miraculous nature. The Quran also anticipates the needs of its audience, offering guidance suitable for individuals at various stages of faith. For those struggling with doubt, it offers signs and rational arguments. For those burdened by guilt, it offers mercy and forgiveness. For those intoxicated with pride, it offers reminders of death and divine power. For the oppressed, it offers hope and justice. For the grateful, it offers praise and closeness. Its structure allows it to be all things to all people, not by changing its message, but by presenting that message in multifaceted ways that meet the heart where it stands. Even in its silence, the Quran speaks volumes. The absence of details in certain stories, the unexplained metaphors, the shifts in tone, all invite the reader to engage actively with the text. It does not hand out all answers on a silver platter, but draws the reader into a conversation. This interactivity between the text and the soul is what gives the Quran its enduring vitality. It is not a book that one reads once and puts away. It is a companion for life, offering new insights at every turn, responding to changing circumstances with unchanging truth. The Quran's structure, then, is not linear, but spiral. It brings the reader back to the same themes, each time with greater depth and clarity. Its depth is not measured in complexity alone, but in the way it engages the full spectrum of human experience: intellectual, emotional, moral, and spiritual. It is a book that meets its reader again and again, always at the right moment, always with the right message. And in doing so, it continues to guide, inspire, and illuminate, just as it has done for centuries, and just as it will continue to do for all time. The Quran reaches beyond the intellect and dives deep into the emotional and spiritual core of the human being. It does not merely inform, it transforms. It is not just a compilation of divine laws or philosophical ideas. It is a dialogue between the Creator and the creation, a living voice that penetrates the layers of the heart and stirs the soul into awakening. The emotional and spiritual impact of the Quran is not theoretical or abstract. It is felt in the tears of the one who hears a verse that resonates with their inner pain, in the serenity that descends upon a heart once overwhelmed with fear, and in the strength that blossoms within someone who once felt weak and lost. It is an experience as intimate as breath and as expansive as the sky. For many, the first encounter with the Quran is not through study or deep reflection, but through sound. The recitation of the Quran, with its melodic cadence and unique rhythm, often evokes a response long before the meaning is understood. Listeners have found themselves moved to tears, experiencing a tranquility they cannot explain. The Arabic language of the Quran, even to those unfamiliar with its vocabulary, carries a musical and emotional weight that defies imitation. This is not merely a cultural phenomenon. It is something deeper. It is the effect of divine speech resonating with the soul's innate recognition of its source. There is a memory embedded in the human heart, a distant echo from before creation when the soul testified to its creator. And the Quran touches that memory in ways that bypass conscious thought. This emotional power is not limited to any one kind of person. Scholars and skeptics, rich and poor, old and young, across history and continents, have testified to moments when the Quran reached into their lives and altered their direction. For some, it came during moments of crisis, when the weight of the world became too heavy to bear. A verse about divine mercy, about the nearness of God, about the meaning of trials, arrived like a healing balm. For others, it came during moments of joy, reinforcing gratitude and reminding them that every blessing is a gift, not a right. In both sorrow and joy, the Quran becomes a companion that never abandons, a mirror that reflects truth, and a teacher that imparts wisdom exactly when it is needed. The spiritual effect of the Quran can also be found in how it reorients the human being toward purpose. In a world filled with distraction, materialism, and confusion, the Quran calls the soul back to its center. It reminds people of who they are, where they came from, and where they are going. It shatters illusions of self-sufficiency and reveals the beauty of reliance on the divine. It pulls back the curtain of this fleeting world to reveal the eternal reality waiting beyond it. By doing so, it instills in the believer a sense of direction, an inner compass that continues to function no matter how dark the surroundings become. For those burdened by guilt and regret, the Quran offers hope that transcends human expectation. It does not portray God as vengeful or distant, but as intensely near and unfathomably forgiving. Verses about repentance invite the sinner not with condemnation, but with love. The door is never closed. Even the one who has wronged himself repeatedly, who feels unworthy of forgiveness, is told not to despair. This message is not just spiritually uplifting, it is emotionally liberating. It allows people to rebuild, to return, and to believe in the possibility of inner renewal. It shifts their view of themselves from broken to beloved, from hopeless to hopeful. At the same time, the Quran is not simply comforting, it also confronts. It speaks to the arrogance that blinds, the greed that corrupts, and the forgetfulness that dulls the soul. It shakes the heart awake with verses that cut through layers of denial and self-deception. It challenges listeners to look at their actions, their intentions, their lives. It warns not out of cruelty, but out of deep concern for the soul's destiny. It calls people to accountability, to moral integrity, and to a life lived in awareness of consequences. In doing so, it awakens the conscience and breathes life into a heart that has grown numb. The emotional effect of the Quran can be seen in the way it is recited during prayer. Muslims around the world stand in quiet rows, listening to or reciting its verses, and in those moments they often find tears falling freely. The night prayer in Ramadan is especially moving, when long portions of the Quran are recited and the atmosphere is filled with humility, longing, and awe. People cry not because they are sad, but because something inside has been touched. Something deep and pure that recognizes the presence of God in the words being spoken. The Quran connects the soul to the divine in a way that transcends language and explanation. Spiritually, the Quran purifies. It removes the stains of anger, jealousy, pride, and envy. Its verses train the heart to be patient in trials, thankful in ease, and humble in both. It teaches self-restraint, reminding people that true strength lies in controlling desires, not in satisfying them. It cultivates empathy, urging believers to care for the orphan, feed the hungry, visit the sick, and treat others with compassion. These lessons are not simply ethical directives. They are spiritual disciplines that refine the character and elevate the soul. In following the Quran, a person does not just become better in the eyes of society. They become closer to their own fitrah, their natural disposition created by God. The Quran also offers a unique form of companionship. It is often described by believers as a friend, a healer, a guide. In moments of loneliness, it offers divine presence. In moments of fear, it offers courage. In moments of confusion, it offers clarity. And in moments of spiritual dryness, it reignites the flame of faith. The Prophet Muhammad once said that the Quran is either a witness for you or against you. This duality speaks to its living nature. It observes, it responds, and it leaves an imprint. No one engages with the Quran sincerely and remains unchanged. For those who memorize it, the Quran becomes a part of their inner world. Each verse committed to memory becomes a sanctuary of meaning, a reserve of strength, a spark of light. When the memorizer prays, reflects, or simply walks through life, these verses accompany them. They arise in moments of need, often without being summoned. This deep integration of divine speech into human memory is not only an intellectual achievement, it is a spiritual bond. It brings the Quran from the pages of a book into the rhythms of the heart and mind. Moreover, the Quran nurtures a direct and personal relationship with God. It is not mediated through clergy, rituals, or institutions. The Quran speaks directly to the individual. When one reads or hears its verses, they are invited into a sacred conversation. The sense of intimacy this creates is profound. The believer does not feel abandoned in a vast universe, but addressed, guided, and embraced by the most merciful. This direct connection dissolves feelings of isolation and grounds the individual in a relationship that transcends all others. The emotional and spiritual impact of the Quran is also evident in the transformation it brings to communities. It has the power to turn enemies into brothers, oppressors into defenders of justice, and the heedless into seekers of truth. History bears witness to how entire societies have been uplifted through the Quran, their laws refined, their hearts softened, and their priorities reordered. From the deserts of Arabia to the cities of Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Quran has breathed life into hearts and inspired civilizations built on faith, knowledge, and compassion. In every era, people have turned to the Quran not only for theological answers, but for emotional healing. The grief-stricken find solace in its promises of reunion in the hereafter. The anxious find peace in its assurances of divine control. The downtrodden find dignity in its emphasis on inner worth. And the seekers of truth find in it a light that guides without arrogance, a wisdom that transcends human limitation. This power to move the heart and elevate the spirit is not accidental. It is the very nature of the Quran. It is described within its own pages as a healing, a mercy, a guidance, and a light. It understands human fragility, and it responds to it not with condemnation, but with compassion. It meets people where they are and invites them to rise. And it does so not once, but again and again, each time offering a new level of insight, a deeper connection, a richer sense of presence. In the end, the Quran's emotional and spiritual impact cannot be fully captured in words. It is something to be experienced, alone in the quiet of the night, in the unity of prayer, in the tears of repentance, in the serenity of submission, and in the joy of remembrance. It is a companion through every chapter of life, guiding with light, speaking with truth, and healing with love. Those who let it into their hearts do not simply read the Quran, they are read by it. They are known, seen, and transformed. And in that transformation lies the miracle that continues to unfold every day in the lives of millions. Living with the Quran is not a passive relationship. It is not something that begins and ends with recitation or study alone. Rather, it is a deeply immersive experience, one that shapes the rhythm of daily life, molds the moral character, and directs the intentions and actions of the believer in every situation. The Quran, as a living guide, becomes part of the air one breathes, the decisions one makes, and the way one views the world and oneself. It is not simply a book to be visited during prayer or Ramadan. It becomes the very lens through which existence is perceived, interpreted, and navigated. From the earliest hours of the morning, when the darkness still clings to the earth and silence fills the spaces between breaths, those who live with the Quran often begin their day with its recitation. The pre-dawn hours are described in the Quran itself as a time of heightened reflection, where the heart is soft and the distractions of the world have yet to awaken. To sit with the Quran during this sacred time is to let its words echo within the soul, preparing the heart for the day ahead. These early moments are not rushed or mechanical, but reverent, filled with the quiet hope that something in the verse recited might unlock a hidden truth or offer an answer long sought. Throughout the day, the Quran continues to walk beside the believer. Its verses, memorized and carried within, rise to the surface in moments of choice and challenge. When tempted to respond to anger with anger, a verse about forgiveness comes to mind and calms the heart. When sadness weighs heavily on the soul, a verse about God's mercy soothes the ache. When confusion clouds the path forward, a verse about patience and trust restores clarity. In this way, the Quran becomes a living conscience, not through guilt or compulsion, but through gentle reminders that invite alignment with a higher standard of being. Those who live with the Quran do not separate its guidance from their worldly affairs. It is not locked within the walls of the mosque or confined to spiritual gatherings. It moves through the kitchen, the workplace, the street, and the family home. It influences how one speaks to a spouse, how one treats children, how one conducts business, and how one behaves when no one is watching. The ethical teachings of the Quran, honesty, kindness, humility, justice, gratitude, are not abstract ideals, but daily practices. They are expressed in the smile offered to a neighbor, the silence maintained in the face of provocation, the help given to someone in need without expectation of return. Living with the Quran means being in a state of constant learning and reflection. One may recite the same verse hundreds of times and find that on a certain day, it reveals a meaning that had never been noticed before. This is not because the verse has changed, but because the person has. The Quran meets the believer where they are, responding to their evolving circumstances, emotions, and understanding. It rewards sincerity with insight and effort with illumination. It does not demand perfection, but it does invite growth, always gently, always persistently. Engagement with the Quran also brings about a refinement of speech. The one who lives with the Quran becomes more careful with words, aware that every utterance is a reflection of the heart. The Quran teaches that a kind word is like a good tree, its roots firm and its branches reaching the sky. The believer begins to speak not to impress or to dominate, but to build, to uplift, and to communicate truth with compassion. Words are chosen with care, silence is embraced when necessary, and the tongue becomes a tool of healing rather than harm. The Quran also nurtures a deep sense of accountability. When a person lives with the Quran, they carry within them the constant awareness that life is not random or purposeless. Every action, every intention, every moment is recorded and will be brought to light. This awareness does not induce fear in a paralyzing way, but cultivates mindfulness and sincerity. It inspires the believer to act with integrity, even when no one else is looking, to strive for excellence not for recognition, but for the pleasure of the one who sees all. It creates a quiet dignity in the heart, a desire to live not for the fleeting praise of people, but for the eternal nearness to the divine. In the face of hardship, the Quran becomes a refuge. It does not promise a life free from pain or difficulty, but it offers meaning within the struggle. Verses about trials, about prophets tested and nations afflicted, provide perspective and comfort. They remind the believer that suffering is not a punishment, but a path to purification. a means of drawing closer to God. Living with the Quran means knowing that every tear shed, every hardship endured, and every moment of patience has value in the divine economy. It is an anchor in the storm, a reassurance that no matter how broken one feels, they are not alone and they are not forsaken. When joy and success come, the Quran guides the response as well. It reminds the believer not to become arrogant or forgetful, but to attribute all blessings to the source from which they flow. Gratitude becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a way of life. Every breath is seen as a gift, every opportunity as a trust, and every blessing as a test of how it will be used. The Quran teaches that those who are grateful will be given more, not just in material wealth, but in contentment, peace, and spiritual richness. Community life also flourishes when individuals live with the Quran. Justice is upheld, not just in courtrooms, but in everyday dealings. Mercy is extended not just to the deserving, but to all. Generosity becomes the norm, gossip is shunned, and trust is honored. The Quran's teachings on consultation, cooperation, and compassion foster bonds of unity and love. Disputes are resolved with fairness, and differences are navigated with respect. The community becomes a reflection of the Quranic ideal, a group of people enjoined to good, forbidding evil, and supporting one another in truth and patience. Living with the Quran also means prioritizing the remembrance of God. The Quran constantly calls the believer to dhikr, the conscious recollection of the divine. This remembrance is not limited to formal prayer, but extends to every moment. Whether walking, working, or resting, the one who lives with the Quran carries a heart turned toward God. This state of remembrance brings peace and stability, grounding the individual in a reality that surpasses the noise of the world. It softens the heart, sharpens awareness, and brings clarity in moments of doubt. Teaching and sharing the Quran becomes a natural extension of living with it. Those who have tasted its sweetness feel compelled to pass it on, not through compulsion, but through love. Parents recite it with their children, teachers explain it with passion, friends reflect on its meanings together. It becomes part of conversation, not in a showy or forced manner, but organically, as something cherished. The transmission of the Quran is not merely through books or lectures, but through lives that embody its message. The greatest da'wah, the most powerful form of invitation to the faith, comes from those who live the Quran so deeply that its light shines through their character. This way of life is not limited to scholars or saints. Ordinary people in every corner of the world live with the Quran in quiet, profound ways. A farmer who begins his day with a verse and ends it in gratitude. A mother who recites to her child while rocking them to sleep. A worker who whispers a prayer under his breath before beginning a task. These moments, small and unseen by the world, are the essence of what it means to live with the Quran. It is not about spectacle or status, it is about sincerity and connection. Even in solitude, the Quran is a companion. It speaks when no one else does. It comforts when words fail. It listens through its verses and responds in the language of divine wisdom. Living with the Quran is a journey of companionship, where the believer walks through life not alone, but hand in hand with guidance that never fades. This companionship is what sustains faith through the ups and downs, the gains and losses, the joys and sorrows. To live with the Quran is to let it shape not just actions, but perceptions. It transforms how one sees the world, not as a place of random events, but as a realm filled with signs pointing toward the Creator. Trees, stars, rivers, and even silence become verses in the grand recitation of existence. The believer begins to read life itself as an extension of the Quran, finding in every moment an opportunity to remember, to reflect, and to return. In the end, living with the Quran is not about reaching a final state of knowledge or perfection. It is about continual return, constant striving, and deepening intimacy. It is a lifelong journey, one that unfolds with each verse recited, each meaning discovered, and each moment aligned with the divine message. It is a life of connection, between heart and revelation, between earth and heaven, between the soul and the one who fashioned it. In living with the Quran, life itself becomes a prayer, a story, a journey of light. Teaching and sharing the Quran has always been more than an act of imparting knowledge. It is a sacred trust, a continuation of the prophetic mission, and an invitation to connect others with the divine message. From the moment the first revelation was received, the Prophet Muhammad became both the recipient and the teacher of the Quran. He conveyed it with unwavering dedication, not just through recitation, but by living its teachings in every aspect of his life. This example laid the foundation for a tradition that has endured for more than 14 centuries, one where believers not only learn the Quran for themselves, but feel a deep sense of responsibility to pass it on. The desire to teach the Quran does not stem from a sense of superiority or authority, but from love. Love for the words of God, love for the truth they carry, and love for the people who have yet to experience their transformative power. Those who have tasted the sweetness of the Quran know it is too precious to keep to themselves. It is a light meant to be shared, a source of healing meant to reach every wounded heart, a guide meant to lead every lost soul. Sharing the Quran, then, becomes an act of compassion, a form of service, and a means of connecting hearts to the Creator. Teaching the Quran begins with sincerity. A teacher of the Quran must approach this task with humility, recognizing that the knowledge they hold is not their own accomplishment, but a gift from God. They are not owners of the message, but vessels through which it flows. This awareness shapes the character of the teacher. They speak with gentleness, correct with wisdom, and inspire with love. Their goal is not to impress or control, but to awaken, to nurture, and to facilitate understanding. They see each student not as a project to complete, but as a soul to uplift, a heart to nurture, and a mind to enlighten. The teaching of the Quran takes many forms. For some, it begins in the home, with a parent patiently guiding their child through the alphabet, then simple words, then the verses of the Quran. These early moments, filled with repetition, song-like tones, and joyful encouragement, form the foundation of a lifelong relationship with the Quran. The child may not yet understand the meanings, but the sound of the words, the rhythm of recitation, and the warmth of learning in love leave an imprint that lasts forever. These humble beginnings in kitchens, living rooms, and bedtime routines are among the most powerful forms of teaching. They are rooted in trust, affection, and consistency. In many communities, the mosque or local Quran school becomes the center for learning. Here, teachers devote their time to helping students perfect their pronunciation, understand tajweed rules, and memorize chapters. The learning process is not rushed. It involves patience, repetition, and continuous revision. A student may spend weeks mastering a single surah, but every effort is cherished. The bond between teacher and student grows not only through the content being taught, but through the shared love for the Quran. These relationships are often remembered for a lifetime. The teacher becomes a guide, a mentor, and sometimes even a second parent. Their words and example echo in the student's life long after the lessons have ended. Beyond the mechanics of recitation, teaching the meanings of the Quran is a deeply enriching process. It involves delving into the tafsir, the interpretation and explanation of verses. This form of teaching brings the Quran to life. It helps students see the relevance of the verses in their own lives, understand the historical and linguistic context, and apply the lessons to modern situations. Teaching tafsir is not about offering rigid answers, but about opening doors to deeper reflection. A good teacher invites questions, encourages exploration, and fosters a space where the Quran can speak to each heart in its unique way. They help students see that the Quran is not distant or abstract, but personal and present. The act of sharing the Quran is not limited to formal teaching settings. It happens in everyday conversations, in moments of guidance, in letters and messages, in social media posts, in books and lectures, in casual reminders among friends. Whenever someone quotes a verse to comfort a grieving friend, to advise a confused colleague, or to inspire someone in despair, they are sharing the Quran. These moments may seem small, but they carry immense weight. A single verse shared with sincerity can change a life. It can spark a transformation, offer a new perspective, or rekindle a faith that was fading. Sharing the Quran is not about preaching, it is about presence. It is about being available, being real, and being a vessel of light in someone's darkness. Teaching the Quran also includes living it. The most powerful lessons are often those that are not spoken but witnessed. When a person embodies the values of the Quran, mercy, justice, patience, generosity, they become a walking reminder of its message. Their actions teach more than words ever could. They show what it means to trust in God, to forgive when hurt, to give when no one is watching, to stand firm in truth even when it costs something. These silent teachings ripple outward, influencing family, neighbors, colleagues, and strangers. The Quran spreads not just through mouths, but through lives. One of the most beautiful aspects of sharing the Quran is that it multiplies. When a teacher helps one student memorize a verse, and that student goes on to teach it to others, the reward of the teacher continues to grow. This chain of transmission stretches across time and geography. It connects hearts in villages, cities, and continents. It transcends race, language, and age. Each recitation is a continuation of a divine legacy. Each act of teaching is a contribution to a living miracle. This is why the Prophet said that the best among people are those who learn the Quran and teach it, not because of status, but because of the ripple effect of goodness they set in motion. Challenges, of course, are part of the journey. Teaching the Quran requires patience, resilience, and a heart willing to be broken and renewed. Students may struggle, lose motivation, or face personal obstacles. Teachers may face criticism, burnout, or doubt. But through it all, the Quran remains a source of strength. It teaches that success is not in numbers or recognition, but in sincerity. Even if a teacher influences only one student, that effort is seen, known, and cherished by the one who sent down the Quran. Every letter taught, every tear shed in frustration or joy, every quiet prayer for a struggling student is part of the sacred path of service. In the modern world, the methods of teaching and sharing the Quran have expanded. Online platforms, video tutorials, apps, and virtual classes allow the Quran to reach people in remote areas, in busy cities, in war zones, in hospitals, in prisons. The barriers of distance and time are being overcome. Yet with all this technology, the essence remains the same. The heart-to-heart connection, the sincerity of the teacher, the humility of the student. These are still the pillars of meaningful learning. Technology can assist, but it cannot replace the warmth of human interaction, the power of a shared moment of realization, or the tears that fall when a difficult verse is finally understood. Those who share the Quran carry a sacred responsibility. They are not just conveying knowledge, they are shaping hearts, guiding souls, and opening doors to eternity. They must approach this task with reverence, with careful attention to their own character, and with a deep reliance on God. Their words must be truthful, their methods gentle, and their aim always to draw others closer to the Quran, not to themselves. They must be willing to keep learning, to listen more than they speak, and to trust that the Quran, when shared with sincerity, will find its way into the hearts it was meant to reach. In every era, God raises individuals who carry the light of the Quran into the world. Some are scholars, others are simple people with pure hearts. Some teach large gatherings, others whisper verses to their children before bed. Some write books, others offer a single verse at the perfect moment. All are connected by the same source, and all are part of the same mission: to ensure that the Quran continues to live, not only on pages, but in hearts, in homes, in communities, and in every corner of the earth where light is needed. Teaching and sharing the Quran is not just an act of service. It is a privilege, an honor, and a path to divine closeness. It is how one becomes part of the unfolding story of revelation, continuing a chain that began in a cave with a single word: read. There comes a point in nearly every believer's life when the Quran ceases to be a distant scripture resting on a shelf and begins to whisper intimately into the corners of their soul. It is in this sacred transformation that a personal connection is born, a quiet, private bond between the reader and the divine message that begins to shape every dimension of life. This connection cannot be measured by how much one has memorized, nor by how many scholarly interpretations one has studied. It cannot be weighed in public displays or assessed by others. It is known only to the heart that carries it. It is felt in the stillness of night, in the rush of gratitude after prayer, in the tears that fall unexpectedly upon hearing a verse that seems written for no one else but you. The journey towards such a connection often begins without fanfare. For some, it starts with curiosity, a longing to understand a book they have always heard about but never truly explored. For others, it begins in the midst of hardship, when nothing else offers comfort and they turn to the Quran with a trembling hope. Sometimes it comes after a long period of distance or doubt, when life's noise finally gives way to silence and the soul can hear again. Whatever the reason, when a person opens the Quran, not just with their eyes but with their heart, something sacred begins. The words no longer sit passively on the page. They rise up to meet the reader, embracing, questioning, challenging, and healing. As this relationship deepens, the Quran stops feeling like a book of ancient stories or abstract laws. It becomes a conversation, deeply alive and deeply personal. The verses that once seemed general now feel specific. A passage about patience finds you exactly when you are exhausted by trials. A line about forgiveness echoes as you stand at the edge of anger. A description of divine mercy soothes your guilt just when shame threatens to overwhelm you. This experience is not merely emotional. It is spiritual recognition. It is the soul hearing its own story told in words from above. This personal bond is strengthened not only by what is read, but by what is lived. When the Quran's guidance is put into practice, its wisdom unfolds in real time. A believer may take a verse about speaking kindly and decide to hold back a harsh word, only to see peace flourish in a tense moment. They may reflect on a verse about giving in charity and decide to share quietly with someone in need, only to find their own heart unexpectedly lifted. These small, everyday acts become threads that weave the Quran into the fabric of life. Slowly, the distance between the reader and the message disappears. The book is no longer outside of them. It is within them, pulsing in their choices, echoing in their thoughts, guiding their steps. Personal connection with the Quran is not built on perfection. It is not about always understanding every verse or never missing a day of recitation. It is not defined by constant spiritual high or unwavering discipline. Like any meaningful relationship, it has its rhythms, its moments of closeness and moments of struggle. There are days when the words leap off the page and wrap around the heart, and there are days when the text feels distant, veiled by distraction or weariness. But what sustains the connection is consistency, sincerity, and the willingness to return. To open the book again, even when the mind feels clouded or the heart heavy, is itself an act of love. The Quran welcomes this return every time, without judgment, without hesitation. This returning, again and again, reveals another layer of the personal bond, the Quran as a mirror. It reflects not only divine truths, but the inner state of the one reading it. A verse that once offered comfort might later feel like a challenge. A passage that once felt obscure may suddenly illuminate a current struggle. The Quran adjusts itself to the reader's life, offering what is needed even when it is not what is expected. It reveals wounds that need healing, illusions that need breaking, and truths that need embracing. In this way, it serves not only as a guide, but as a companion in self-discovery. Many people find that the most profound moments of connection with the Quran happen not in scholarly study circles or formal lectures, but in the quiet, hidden spaces of daily life. In the car, while listening to recitation. In the early morning, when the house is still asleep. At a desk, during a pause in work. By a hospital bed, in a moment of uncertainty. The Quran slips into these spaces with gentle authority, turning the ordinary into sacred encounters. These moments accumulate over time, building a relationship that is intimate and enduring. For some, the journey with the Quran is marked by tears, not dramatic sobs, but quiet, cleansing tears that fall when the soul recognizes something too deep for words. These tears are not a sign of weakness, but of presence. They mark the moments when the veils between the self and the message are lifted, if only for a breath, and the reality of divine love and truth is felt directly. They are not planned or performed. They are simply the heart's response to being seen, understood, and called by the one who fashioned it. Others may find that their bond with the Quran is built through reflection. They read slowly, pausing to ask questions, to ponder, to wrestle with meanings. They journal their thoughts, sit in silence with verses, revisit them over time. They do not rush to conclusions or feel pressure to master every layer. They allow the Quran to reveal itself in stages, in accordance with their readiness. This reflective approach creates a depth of relationship that is contemplative and rich. It allows the message to mature within them, to stretch and evolve alongside their own spiritual growth. In both tears and thought, in silence and action, the Quran becomes more than a guidebook. It becomes a dialogue. The believer speaks through their prayers, their struggles, their yearning. And the Quran responds, not always with direct answers, but with direction, assurance, and presence. This conversation does not always resolve dilemmas or erase pain, but it anchors the soul. It tells the believer that they are not alone, that they are heard, that there is purpose even when there is no clarity. And it continues, day after day, for as long as the heart remains open. One of the most beautiful aspects of this personal connection is that it is unique for each person. No two believers experience the Quran in exactly the same way. A verse that shakes one heart may be a whisper to another. A surah that feels like home to one person may challenge another to change. The Quran knows how to speak to each soul in its own language. It meets people where they are and leads them gently to where they need to be. It is a living message, shaped not by time or place, but by the infinite wisdom of the one who sent it. The Quran does not ask for grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It asks for openness, for sincerity, for a willingness to let it in. It asks the reader to approach it not as a stranger, but as a seeker. It welcomes every attempt, every return, every sincere reading. It does not punish confusion or distance. It simply waits, ready to speak again when the heart is ready to listen. This mercy, this patience, is part of what makes the Quran so profoundly personal. It is not just a record of past revelation. It is an ongoing conversation with each soul that chooses to engage. Over the years, as the believer lives through the changing seasons of life, joy and grief, certainty and doubt, success and failure, the Quran becomes a steady presence. It becomes the place one turns to in celebration and in despair, in questioning and in clarity. It becomes the one book that knows every version of the reader, that has walked with them through every chapter of life. This companionship is not visible to the outside world. It does not announce itself or seek validation, but it shapes the inner world, creating a quiet strength, a deep trust, a luminous faith. In the end, the personal connection with the Quran is not about how much one knows, but how much one listens. Not how often one recites, but how sincerely one responds. It is not a competition or a performance. It is a relationship. One built over time, through presence, through effort, through love. It is a connection that carries a person through the turbulence of life and into the stillness of the eternal. It is the heart finding its home in the word of the one who created it. And in that home, there is peace, there is purpose, there is love. The Quran is more than a book of guidance. It is a living sign of the eternal promise that God made to humanity, a promise that his word would never be lost, never be corrupted, and never be rendered irrelevant. That promise stretches across the veil of time, untouched by the winds of change, and remains as vibrant today as it was when the first verses were revealed in a quiet cave to a man who was alone but never abandoned. From the moment the divine words descended, carried by the angel of revelation, the Quran became a beacon, illuminating the path for those who sought truth, offering light in the darkest valleys, and whispering comfort to hearts shattered by the weight of life. The eternal promise is that this book would be preserved, not by human efforts alone, though those would be noble and sincere, but by divine will. God himself declared that he would guard it. This is not merely a vow to protect ink and parchment, but to preserve meaning, clarity, guidance, and truth. Despite the centuries that have passed, despite empires rising and falling, despite wars, migrations, and the scattering of people across continents, the Quran remains unchanged. A child in a small village can open a copy and read the same verses recited by early companions in Medina. An old man sitting by the fire in a mountain home in Central Asia can recall the same words whispered by scholars in Cairo or Istanbul. This unbroken continuity is not just a historical marvel, it is the fulfillment of a promise made by the Creator to his creation. The eternal promise is not limited to textual preservation. It extends to the hearts that carry the Quran within them. Across every generation, there have been those who memorize the entire text, word for word, letter by letter. Not in isolation, but in vibrant communities where one generation taught the next, where students sat before teachers reciting the divine words with love, discipline, and awe. This oral tradition remains one of the most powerful proofs of the Quran's preservation. Even if every printed copy of the Quran were to disappear tomorrow, it would be rewritten within days from the memory of those who have committed it to heart. This is no small feat. There is no other book on earth that exists in the hearts of so many, across cultures, languages, and continents, passed on not as folklore, but with precision and care that reflects divine safeguarding. But the promise goes deeper still. It is not just about the survival of words. It is about the survival of relevance. The Quran is not a document sealed in the past, frozen in the language and issues of a bygone era. It speaks with power to every time, every place, and every heart that seeks to understand. Its verses address human nature, which remains unchanged through the march of time. Greed, fear, love, ambition, anger, forgiveness, these are not new. They were part of the human condition then, and they remain so now. And so the Quran continues to speak, to confront, to soothe, to awaken. A verse about justice rings as urgently today as it did in the 7th century. A verse about mercy can melt the heart of a sinner 1,000 years later, as easily as it did in the presence of the prophet. Part of what makes this promise eternal is that the Quran contains within it the seeds of continuous reflection. Its meanings do not expire. They unfold. A person may read the same chapter 100 times and still find something new, something they did not have the capacity to understand before, something that speaks to the moment they are now living. This is no coincidence. It is the effect of a divine word that meets the reader where they are, adapting its revelation not by changing its content, but by revealing its layers according to the heart's readiness. This timeless engagement is a sign of divine authorship. A human text grows old, becomes outdated, or requires revision. The Quran, unchanged in form, renews itself through its interaction with the evolving inner world of the reader. The promise also includes the Quran's ability to protect hearts from despair. In a world of chaos, noise, and confusion, the Quran offers an inner sanctuary. Its verses remind the anxious that they are not alone, that there is purpose beyond pain, and that even in the silence of unanswered prayers, the one who hears all, is still near. The eternal promise is not that life will be easy, but that the guidance to endure it with grace, meaning, and strength will never disappear. The Quran offers the vocabulary for patience, for surrender, for trust. It arms the believer with the tools not only to survive but to transform trials into elevation, wounds into wisdom, and sorrow into submission that brings peace. There is also the promise that those who follow its light will never be led astray. It is a compass that does not fail, no matter how lost one feels. When culture shifts, when opinions change, when certainty seems impossible, the Quran remains constant. It offers a standard that is not subject to popularity or power. It reminds humanity that truth is not determined by numbers or trends, but by divine revelation. It dares the reader to be independent of their own desires, to surrender not to self, but to the one who created the self. And in doing so, it grants a freedom deeper than any worldly liberty. The freedom to be in alignment with the divine will. The freedom to live with clarity, and the freedom to die with hope. The eternal promise is also expressed in the Quran's impact on civilization. It did not remain a private devotion. It gave rise to societies rooted in knowledge, justice, and beauty. It inspired scientists, poets, artists, architects, and leaders. It nurtured a culture of scholarship that spanned continents, producing libraries, universities, and centers of thought that illuminated the world during the darkest centuries of human history. The Quran taught that seeking knowledge is an act of worship, that justice is a divine mandate, and that beauty is a reflection of God's majesty. These teachings translated into policies, institutions, and lives that changed history. This too is part of the promise that the Quran would not be confined to ritual, but would overflow into life, shaping both the private heart and the public square. Yet the Quran's greatest miracle is not in its historical influence or its preservation alone. It is in the way it enters hearts, quietly, persistently, without force, and changes them. It enters through a single verse, a moment of listening, a quiet recitation in the early morning hours, and it begins a transformation. It awakens conscience, stirs longing, heals trauma, and rekindles faith. It does not require perfection to begin, only a willingness to open the door. The eternal promise is that no matter how far one has strayed, no matter how broken one feels, the Quran can always find its way in. And once it does not leave a person where it found them. It raises them. This promise extends to every human being. The Quran is not the possession of a single ethnicity, nation, or generation. Its message is universal, its reach unrestricted. It speaks to the intellect, the heart, and the soul. It invites all, without exception, to the mercy of the one who revealed it. It promises that guidance is available to any who seek it sincerely. It levels the barriers built by pride, prejudice, and assumption. It does not discriminate by language or skin color or social status. Its words belong to every sincere seeker, and its light is offered freely to any who wish to walk the path of clarity and truth. In a world that often seems fractured, where people long for meaning and authenticity, the Quran remains a living testament to the unchanging mercy and wisdom of the divine. Its verses echo in the streets of cities and the silence of deserts, in the hearts of children and the minds of scholars, in the joy of the newly guided and the steadfastness of the lifelong believer. It binds together a community that stretches across the globe, united not by appearance or language, but by shared reverence for a book that transcends them all. To hold the Quran is to hold a miracle. To recite it is to speak divine speech. To live by it is to enter a life of meaning, alignment, and peace. The promise that sustains this reality is not man-made. It is eternal. It is preserved in heaven and reflected on earth. It is fulfilled in every memorized verse, every tearful prayer, every act of justice carried out because of its command. The Quran was sent down, but it continues to lift hearts upward. And as long as there are those who listen, who recite, who believe and act, the promise lives. It lives in their hands, on their tongues, in their choices, and most beautifully, in their hearts. The Quran is not merely a book to be read from beginning to end. It is a journey without a final page, a river whose depths can never be fully measured, a voice that continues to speak long after the recitation has ended. For those who allow it to enter their lives, not only as a book of law or history, but as a companion, a mirror, and a guide, it becomes the most intimate part of their existence. It walks beside them in solitude and in company, in joy and in grief, in clarity and in confusion. It whispers reminders when they stray, offers comfort when they ache, and lifts them when they fall. Living with the Quran is not about possessing its words. It is about letting its words possess the heart in a way that sanctifies every step of the human journey. As time passes and the seasons of life change, the relationship with the Quran deepens. A young believer might first approach it with curiosity or duty, eager to fulfill a religious obligation or to understand what others have cherished for centuries. As the years go on, that initial encounter grows roots. The same verses read during youth take on new meaning in adulthood. The stories once seen as fables become lessons on human nature. The commands once viewed as rules become pathways to liberation. The heart begins to recognize that it is being spoken to, not just generally, but personally. The words of the Quran start to feel less like distant truths and more like reflections of one's own soul. There is something extraordinary in the way the Quran grows with a person. It is not static, though it never changes. It transforms because the reader transforms. In childhood, it may be a song of innocence. In adolescence, a call to self-awareness. In adulthood, a grounding compass. In old age, a faithful companion whispering peace in the face of eternity. The Quran has no expiry date, no cultural limitation, no era to which it belongs more than another. It belongs to the soul, which remains ever in need of remembrance, direction, and connection. The power of the Quran lies not only in its language or structure, but in its ability to pierce through the noise of the world. In an age of endless distraction, instant gratification, and mounting pressures, it offers stillness. It does not shout for attention, but draws the heart gently inward. A single verse, recited slowly and sincerely, can silence 1,000 doubts. A short surah can bring down tears after days of numbness. The rhythm of the Quran's recitation, its measured pauses and divine cadence, reshapes the atmosphere of any room in which it is played. It doesn't entertain the ego, it nourishes the soul. Those who keep the Quran close often find that it offers not just guidance, but companionship. It does not grow tired of the reader. It does not hold grudges for neglect. It does not close its doors after a mistake. It welcomes return again and again, each time offering more than before. It meets the seeker not with shame, but with open arms. Its verses invite, persuade, and call with grace. The relationship it fosters is not transactional, but transformative. It gives freely, but it requires sincerity in return. It promises nothing less than a life of meaning and a place in the eternal realm where its light continues forever. In times of hardship, the Quran does not deny the pain of the human condition. It acknowledges sorrow, injustice, loss, and fear. But it does not leave the heart there. It guides it through. It shows that even the most beloved of people, the prophets, faced trials, and it recounts how they endured not through strength alone, but through faith. The Quran does not offer false promises of an easy life. It offers something better. The assurance that every difficulty has purpose, that every trial can be an elevation, and that in every hardship, God is near. For the believer, this realization transforms suffering into growth and grief into nearness. In moments of ease, the Quran does not breed complacency. It reminds the heart of gratitude, of responsibility, of the fleeting nature of blessings. It teaches that wealth and comfort are not the final goal, but tests of character. It warns that forgetfulness often follows abundance and that true success lies in remembrance, even during prosperity. Thus, it keeps the believer grounded, aware, and humble. It does not allow the heart to drift too far from its purpose, whether on a path of sorrow or joy. To live with the Quran is also to find beauty in repetition. A verse recited during prayer becomes a lifelong companion. It is there in quiet dawns, whispered before sleep, spoken aloud in moments of fear. These verses become part of the inner landscape of the believer, providing structure and meaning to moments both mundane and profound. They form the soundtrack to a life lived in connection with something greater. They are never exhausted. Each time they are read, something new is revealed. Each time they are recited, they take root a little deeper. This enduring connection is not limited to those who speak Arabic or who have studied deeply. The Quran welcomes every level of engagement. The child learning the alphabet, the adult trying to read with proper pronunciation, the elder reflecting on meanings with quiet reverence, all are honored. What matters is not how much is known, but how sincerely one approaches it. The Quran does not measure worth in fluency, memory, or academic mastery. It measures the turning of the heart toward truth. And in that turning, it delivers its promise, a light for the present world and salvation for the next. Even at the end of life, when the body weakens and the world fades, the Quran remains. It is the verse whispered on the tongue of the dying. It is the chapter recited at gravesides. It is the comfort to the grieving, the hope for the departed. It reminds the living that this life is only the beginning, and that beyond the veil lies a realm where the Quran continues to shine. Those who lived with it in this world will find it interceding for them in the next. Its words will not be forgotten. They will be companions in the grave, wings on the day of judgment, and light in the eternal gardens promised to the righteous. To conclude a journey through the Quran is not to finish anything. It is only to begin again, deeper, with greater love, greater awe, greater commitment. The Quran is not a story with a final chapter. It is a circle, always returning to the heart. Each reading leads to another. Each verse opens a door. Each reflection brings new clarity. And through it all, the believer walks a path lit by divine wisdom, never truly alone, never truly lost. The Quran becomes the soul's anchor, the heart's compass, the mind's clarity, and the spirit's highest joy. This sacred book is not just meant to be held in the hand or stored on a shelf. It is meant to live in the heart, to guide the tongue, to shape the character, and to elevate the life. It is a gift beyond words, a gift that continues to give as long as one is willing to receive. And in receiving it, the believer discovers not only the words of God, but the nearness of God Himself. That is the ultimate miracle. That is the eternal blessing. That is the promise fulfilled every day for every soul that turns toward the Quran with sincerity, longing, and love.